Hello, and welcome to the podcast, Phenomenosophy, Episode 3, Beyond the Matrix. How you doing today, Gingy?
Doing well, man. Doing well. How you doing?
I am very well. So, I definitely am excited, I guess, the word, about this particular episode because it's, I feel like it incorporates so many of the philosophies that I personally um, have adopted as principles within my life. And I feel it's extremely beneficial for an individual to be able to get outside of themselves and outside of the matrix um, as a practice for wisdom and I would say general well-being, from mental well-being to physical well-being. So I'd like to start off by kind of because my goal is to not only tie in philosophy, but also to tie it in to the metaphors of the Matrix, the movie, because I feel that it's actually an extremely powerful metaphor. And now I haven't thought through, although I have done this in the past, I have tied in the concepts of the Matrix into philosophical conversations. So it's not something I'm new to, but it's been many years since I've done it. So it's probably not going to be how I've tied it in before, but it will be tied together somehow, some way. That is my goal. And I'd like to start off, as we usually do, by defining a couple things. So,
What is the Matrix?
what is the Matrix? And I'm gonna go to Morpheus for this one because he's got some great quotes. And again, we're going to tie this in metaphorically. So Morpheus in the movie The Matrix, in speaking with Neo, the Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. And then Neo, what truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, into a prison that you cannot taste or see or touch, a prison for your mind. And I'm gonna bring up a couple Morpheus quotes throughout this conversation, but we're gonna start there with what is the Matrix, and the approach that I want to take during this conversation is not the Matrix as you are a victim of, but the Matrix as you have power with, meaning through your own practices, you can free yourself from the Matrix and get beyond the Matrix, especially once you get to a point of being able to identify what the Matrix is and how you have been bonded to it, right? So
let's break that down a little bit, because
okay,
in the movie we know what he's talking about at this point.
right.
Unless you've never seen the movie, then probably go see that movie. So what they're talking about in there is a computer program that everybody's in, sort of like a virtual reality machine plugged directly hardwired into someone's brain, right?
Right.
Spoiler alert. So we're not necessarily talking about that, but it's a cool analogy for what are we talking about?
Exactly. And yes, I don't want to, I'm not trying to imply that you're all plugged into some machine somewhere, but what a great metaphor, because if you are reacting to the world through the Matrix, you are, in some sense, feeding a machine, many machines, right? It was the machine world that is powered by you. And this machine, which constitutes all the systems of society, has become as powerful as it is because we feed it. Our energy goes to prop up the matrix, right? and the systems that feed back the matrix to us. Now, I'm not trying to imply that the matrix is purely something fed to you, because it's also a function of your interpretations of reality. And so here's the conversation that we need to have to set up some presuppositions that will be underpinning this conversation about reality. Let me bring up Morpheus. Morpheus has something to say about reality, right?
Cool.
And he says, what is real? How do you define real? Is real what you can feel, smell, taste, and see? Well, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. So, what is reality? And from a philosophical standpoint, the underlying philosophy I want to pin in here, so that this is I feel, a model that empowers us as individuals with the matrix, so that we can free ourselves and get beyond the matrix and operate outside of it, so to speak. So, what is reality? For this particular conversation, and I want to know what you think about this, and how I'm going to approach this conversation of reality. So, in previous podcasts, we've discussed consciousness. And so for this particular conversation, I'm kind of borrowing from some Western philosophy, definitely Eastern philosophy, on the nature of consciousness and its relationship to reality. So if we presuppose that consciousness itself is reality, and like I said, I'm going to be able to tie this in with the model of the matrix very well, actually. So if consciousness itself is reality, okay, and the subjective and objective nature of our reality, for instance, and what I mean by subjective and objective is we perceive the world as if it is outside of us from a subjective perspective, and we analyze and give meaning to the world as the objective, okay? So from that worldview of there being a difference and a distinction between the subjective and objective, the world outside of you is reality, right? The objective world is reality, and your subjectiveness, the experience of reality, is distinctly different, as if it's a dualism, as if they are separate. Philosophy that I want to underpin for this particular conversation is that there is no true separation between the objective and subjective, that it is consciousness, that they are features of consciousness, that which we call objective and that which we call subjective are a process of consciousness. And so there being no distinct separation between the two, and that so it's kind of like a ontological ecology, and that, being in the world, being itself is tied to the ecosystem of being, we'll call it. So the environment, right? So the environment and the perspective within the environment are all feature of consciousness, or all a feature of consciousness. So that's kind of the philosophy I want to underpin here as we move forward in this conversation, because again, I feel like it empowers us. Having that as the foundational worldview in this particular conversation of freeing oneself from the matrix, I feel that perspective lends us more power to free ourselves from the matrix
Can we put that
so many
in
ways.
in like a simplified version
How about you tell me
where
here, you tell me what you just heard.
yeah. So what it sounds
Explain to
like
me.
to me is the philosophy of the dream happens within the dreamer. Everything within the dream is within the consciousness of the dreamer. So
Okay. Now notice, hold on, but here you're making
Okay.
the distinction. So I don't know if I made this clear. I'm not operating under the philosophy of dualism where the conscious perspective and the objective world are something separate. So that I
Right.
brought that up, but that's not the perspective we're going to be pinning. So I just want to make that clear as you move forward. Okay.
And that's where I
Right.
was going with that, where
Okay.
there really is no separation between the dream and the dreamer,
Mhm.
just like there's no real separation between the different characters in the dreams or the different objects in the dreams.
Right.
It's all the process of dreaming.
Right.
So would that be a simplified version of what you just said?
Yes,
You used
because
a
you
lot of big words.
because you yes, and because you explained it as process, dreaming, right?
Mhm.
So there's so many words we could apply here and then break them down and what is the meaning of that? Like we could say living, we could say being, right? But rather than seeing it as subject object, we see it as process. So the word you use there, dreaming, is I would say completely appropriate because dreaming is process. And from process, we could create false terminals like dreamer and dream. But
Right.
there is no dreamer and there is no dream without that process of dreaming. So what if we say, well, reality is dreaming, and then we create the concept of dreamer and dream as these distinctions that aren't necessarily reality. We've just separated, and again, this process of separating ourselves is very useful. I mean, as we get into what being beyond the matrix is, you'll find that being beyond the matrix would make you completely dysfunctional in society. Because you would have no common interpretations with the people around you. It's kind of like a newborn. A newborn is completely oceanic in its consciousness, so it's useless as far as functioning within society. So you could see that when you really, if you get beyond the matrix, because you free yourself completely of your worldview and your presuppositions and the narratives. Okay, this is going to be key in this conversation. The narratives that you filter the world through. If you were completely free of all that, there would be no basis for interaction with you and other individuals. So, being beyond the matrix is powerful and can bring insight and can bring enlightenment and can facilitate bringing your mindset to a place of peace or joy or whatever, especially if you find yourself in a situation where you're not experiencing that or you're experiencing something you don't want to be experiencing. By being able to separate yourself and get beyond the matrix, you can be in a place of I mean, in many different philosophies, they have many different names for it. I would say, like in the concepts of Chan or Zen, you have Satori, which is this moment of complete awareness of reality. And in that moment, it's all you're experiencing the true nature of the universe and absolute truth. And this doesn't only exist within, these particular disciplines or ideologies. It exists almost in every spiritual tradition, especially like in religion, even in Western religion. Yeah, shamanism, Western religion, even people who do psychedelics have these types of experiences where it's like, this experience of complete connection and the dissolving of all your worldview and interpretations to where it's like you see it. And then what's funny is then you try to communicate it, but to communicate it, you got to kind of like come back in, you got to go back into the matrix. And as soon as you step back into the matrix, you can't really explain what you just experienced, because now you're limited with again, your worldview is back, your narratives are back, you have to use the symbols of your language, which are limited in expressing that experience. But
Dude, funny enough, I actually accidentally entered into a state like that. It wasn't the
right,
exact same. But it
right,
was where I could know in that moment all there was to know. My
right,
role in growing grass and shining the sun. I knew who was going to speak. I knew what they were going to speak about. I knew the events coming in my immediate future. It was as if I was just plugged in,
right.
and it was overwhelming.
Yeah,
I couldn't do anything but just stare with my jaw dropped.
right.
Uh,
Yes.
it's like a little overload.
And that's an experience reported by people all over the world throughout the ages. And here's the problem. How you interpret that experience has to do with the narratives that you are driven by, right? So people who grow up in the Western traditions of religion, right? They think, "Oh my God, I'm Jesus Christ," and then everyone else like, yeah, and everyone else like, "Whoa, dude, no, you're not," and so it because to have that experience, it's like, well, I gotta be. Like for a moment, for a moment I knew how the whole universe worked, and I saw what was coming. I knew what you were going to say, and so and in many traditions, depending on your worldview, especially in the Western tradition, that's like immediately you'd start walking around telling people you're God or Jesus Christ because of an experience you had, you're not going to be well received. Well, I don't know, maybe in our current culture, maybe it's
your
like,
audience.
Well, I identify as Jesus Christ. So, however, in some traditions, like in India, where it's like I would say their worldview, right? The foundational worldview based in Hinduism is that the Brahman is the ultimate reality, what we would translate as God, is all there is, and that all expressions of the Brahman, every individual, every animal, every planet, every star, the Brahman manifests and expresses in all these different forms. So in that tradition, if you were to walk up to someone and go, "Oh my God, I'm God," they're like, yeah, you are. No big deal. Like, yeah, oh, you figured it out. Good job. Congratulations. So there's no stigma to it. Whereas in Western traditions, like, no, there's only one, and you ain't him. And so it's depending on the culture and the worldviews and the narratives of that culture, you will even have judgments about it for yourself, because again, if you're unaware of those narratives and that worldview that drives the filters that you see reality through, there's no other way for you to express it or experience it other than from your worldview and from your narrative. So if the worldview, if the narrative is that there's this one God and he gets it, he's operating on all levels and has complete awareness of everything, and then you have an experience where you have what you experience as complete awareness of everything, you're like, "Oh, well, shit, I guess I'm God." And because that's the only way you have to explain it or to express it, is that like that's what it was. You guys don't know, like, but I know. I know I'm God because I had this experience. So
I've actually had a friend that came up to me and was like, "Oh my God, dude, Jesus came to me in my sleep and he was telling me all this information." I was like, "How do you know it was Jesus?" He's like, "Well, because the way he looked in the robes." And I was like, "Did you ask him his name?" Like, "Well, no." Like, so you're just guessing. Like, you got no real concrete idea on who that was.
Right. Yeah, but he had the experience that it was. Right. And again, he's interpreting his experience through his worldview. If he grew up in Western traditions and Western religion, of course that's Jesus. Now, if he grew up in an Islamic nation under Islamic beliefs, he'd be like, "Oh, dude, it was Muhammad. Muhammad came to me and spoke to me." And maybe if he was in a part of Judaism, maybe he would see this individual as one of the prophets of Moses or of God himself, right? So,
but for all I know, because I really wasn't there, I didn't have the experience. For all I know, it was Jesus, and he was dead on, and he didn't have to ask. I'm like, that's absolutely real too, or could be real, a real possibility.
Right.
For me, hearing it secondhand, I don't know. For him, he was dead
Right.
certain. Yep,
Right.
that was
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. And so again, in this conversation, what I want to look at is the narratives in the worldview, because until you can get outside of your narratives and worldview and the ideologies which you have adopted that you're not even necessarily aware or conscious of, but it is absolutely filtering and biasing information, right? If we just, if again, if we let's look
That's
at
the Matrix.
yes, let's look at the animation of the Matrix. Okay, so here, and so this is, I'm going to try to tie this in metaphorically with this imagery from the movie, right? And this isn't actually from the movie, I don't think. Somebody's interpretation of the imagery from the movie. So reality is consciousness. So behind this, okay? So the context of this is reality is consciousness. What we're seeing here is information, right? So it's events. We'll just say events because it could be somebody
It doesn't
speaking.
even look like information. It looks like a shitload of symbols that aren't even
Right.
numbers or letters that I can really identify.
Well,
Except
because
for maybe the number 9.
you're not
E.
you're not a machine. This is
Okay.
the language of the machines. Okay, so
Okay.
so don't get too deep into that aspect of it. But so these are like streams, and really you can see it. It almost looks like there's layers of it. So it's this infinite amount of information. Remember, you said something I think a couple podcasts ago about how there are so many bits of information that we actually take in, but our conscious attention is only on a very small portion of it. But so if you look at this as like this is the events around you. So, and remember Cypher in the movie, he's all, I don't even see the code anymore. I see blonde, I see brunette, you know. And so, but what he's saying, again, what is being demonstrated there is there's raw information, but Cypher sees the illusion, right? Based on his beliefs, based on his worldview, he only sees his interpretation of the information. So again, if this represents all the events that you could experience in life, right? Whether it's someone speaking, whether it's an itch on your leg, whether it's the images in the room, right? So we'll define that as events, not that, you know, the chair sitting in the corner is necessarily eventful, but that you seeing the chair in the corner is an event, right? Now, chairness, right? That chair is an interpretation through my worldview of, we'll say, I'm going to call it raw information, right? So it's raw information being taken in by my eyes, right? So
I would call it
visual
stimulus.
That's fine. That works, you know.
Pure stimulus and your interpretation of the stimulus, the electrical signals, the whatever it may be.
Right. But also consider,
or whatever.
Right, but also consider thoughts as part of this. So something that, because people, it's funny, just like breathing. So breathing, you can be conscious of and have control over, but when you're not conscious of it and not directly controlling it, it happens, right? It's the same with thoughts. Like you can direct your thoughts into thinking about something, but if you aren't directing your thoughts and aren't necessarily conscious or aware and steering them, they happen, right? They're just going. So, and a lot of times it's processing, right? It's taking in the events around the individual and interpreting it, giving it meaning, right? So that's the next thing. So if everything around us, whether it's like you said, stimulus, whether it's visual stimulus, audible stimulus, tactile stimulus, I'm calling it information, but it has no inherent meaning. That meaning comes into this at the layer of narrative and worldview. So we have in our background.
Something I pointed out in one of our maybe offline conversations.
Right.
The meaning gets assessed and ascribed after the present moment. It's always in hindsight, whether it's a millisecond later or years later.
Right, right. And it seemingly happens simultaneously because you react seemingly instantaneously to an event, right?
Yeah.
So something occurs and you immediately react, even if the reaction is internal, meaning something like a feeling. Feeling is definitely one of those things that is immediately there with an event, right? So you have a newborn child, you see the child, immediately the feeling within you, love, appreciation, gratitude, whatever you like, it's immediate. Like the feeling is just within you in being in that experience with the newborn child, right? So whether we're talking about feelings, thoughts, all of that's the matrix, in that those are all being generated through our worldview, our narratives that give these otherwise neutral events meaning. Okay. And so, how does this imprison us? How does this enslave us? Well, when we're unconscious of the narratives, ideologies, and worldview we have no power over our reaction to the neutral events. They become,
it's just an automatic.
Yes, they become the events around us and our reactions to them, the feelings we feel, the thoughts we think, we're enslaved by them. We have no power to have a different reaction. And so in getting beyond the matrix, first thing is a level of awareness and presence to the narratives, ideologies, and worldview that is giving meaning to all these neutral events. Because once you are able to consciously separate yourself and be able to look at and see the ideologies you hold and the truths that they create out of the neutral events around you, right? So, and again, being beyond the matrix 100% of the time makes you dysfunctional in a society. So it's not like you want to necessarily step into being in that experience of being completely outside of your let's call them tools, right? So they're not good or bad, right? Narratives, ideologies, in fact, or worldview, they could be very useful because
they're very necessary in a lot of situations.
Right, absolutely. However, they're also malleable, which again, if you're not aware of and can't separate yourself from your beliefs or your worldview or the narratives and ideologies that drive you, if you cannot get your consciousness and your awareness outside of that and look at it for what it is and see like, that's why I give events like this meaning, right? Then you're trapped, okay? And then you look at what shapes the ideologies, what shapes the worldview, what shapes your beliefs and narratives. And so in our present society, we have mass media, right? Oh my God. This is
real quick before we get into that. Let's break down a little bit.
Okay.
What the process looks like, because we've mapped this out in training rooms before.
Right.
Where an event happens, whatever the event is.
Right.
Some type of stimulus comes in, someone says an act, someone says something, some big thing happens in the world we don't know.
Right.
And then the individual has an automatic reaction to it.
Right.
And that reaction creates a specific result in relationship to it. And
absolutely.
Then repeats, right? Or we talk about the other side of the circle where an event happens, you see it for what it is, and you choose your response to it.
Right. And that's the power. And and you can only have that choice and that power with that event if you can separate yourself from the things that have you on automatic, right? So there's that level of being on automatic, which I would say 99.9% of humans are on automatic 99% of the time. Because it's useful.
Yeah.
Again, it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just, it's functional, it's useful. Like, I mean, how often do you drive from one location to another and you're like, oh, Jesus, I don't even know how I got here. You know,
How
like,
boring would it be to shower intentionally? I'm gonna scrub each hair. I'm gonna...
Exactly. You're in automatic when you're showering. You're just, you're going through the process that you don't even have to think about. But when you start to, like, a practice, right, that we can embody, or that we can start to bring into our lives in order to develop that skill of separating ourselves, is intentionality. Because in intentionality, like you said, in showering, right? That's, I mean, you could turn a shower into a meditation in being fully present to an intentional with every aspect of the shower, to where you're present to the feeling of the water and the temperature of the water, and you're present to what you're currently washing and then what you're washing next. And so, and this practice of getting outside of automatic, it's almost like that's the first step, right? Let's get off automatic by being intentional.
Being present. For me, it's being present to the automatic.
Right.
Like noticing the patterns that I get into. Sometimes I'll get into the shower and I'll just watch. Wow, this is the third day in a row I've washed from top to bottom. Not that I need to.
You only do that
intentionally.
That's like every day for me. It's whoop, whoop. That's just the process.
Well, no, I'm noticing. I'm being present.
Oh, okay.
And this is the third day I've noticed. The third day I've noticed I go top to bottom. I'm like, huh, interesting. That's a pattern. Oh, this is the 8th time I've driven the same route home from work. Interesting. I take the same way every time. Or I go first thing in the morning and I click the kettle on and start warming up some water for a tea or something. Right. These things, just to notice them, for me, is enough to start off that entire process. Because once I'm present to it, when a stimulus happens, like I wake up in the morning and I start walking downstairs, I'm like, oh, that's because my automatic is to go make tea. Right. Like, okay, cool. And instead I could say, you know what? Today's a juice day. And I can jump right into that automatic process and intentionally at that point be intentional with the action that I do take. Right. Now this goes beyond useful when you get out of the mundane day-to-day, showering and tea in the morning and washing your hair and stuff like that, driving home, and it gets into when somebody offends you. Right. Somebody says something and you automatically respond to it. Mm-hmm. Instead of choosing what you want what they say to mean, or being clear as to what they meant by it, and choosing to respond in a way that best serves you. That's an entirely different intentionality. Right. Instead of saying, you pissed me off and you're a jerk. And leaving it at that. Yeah. And there's where the power is, right? The power in getting beyond the matrix, because it's the matrix that has you pissed off at this really neutral event. You gave it meaning. You made it negative. And I mean, I have that with what I'll call, in a neutral space, of feedback. If somebody gives me feedback on something, automatic, in this, I'm sure I can point to childhood experience. I could probably point to a whole bunch of reasons why my worldview and the narrative I hold is that when people give you feedback, it is criticism. And it's an attack.
It's negative. It's criticizing. So I could see it that way, right? Or if I can step outside of myself in that moment. So I'm pretty good at it when I ask for feedback, because it's like I've already done the process of like, okay, this isn't criticism. so I've stepped outside of the automatic, and I'm able to get, for the event to occur, the feedback to come, and be in a space of neutrality with it, and then choose in that moment to be, I choose to use this information for my own benefit, right? I'm going to grow from this. Yeah.
I love the term feedback, because for me, it's the most accurate terminology for what's happening. It's not something coming at you out of the blue.
Right.
It's something that you fed in and it's feeding back.
Right. Right.
To what we're calling the matrix, right?
Right. Yeah. And it occurs on all levels of life because you get feedback. Like, let's say you're at a restaurant and your waitress walks by and you want to get her attention, and whatever method you choose to get her attention, and she turns around, and you can see anger and frustration in her face, and you're like, oh yeah, that's feedback. That's feedback for me that method that I just used wasn't effective, in getting what I want in this situation. And it's feedback for like where she's at in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
It may have nothing to do with because if you immediately react to her immediate reaction, well, now you're like, well, and you make up a name for her, you have some pejorative, and you may not say it out loud. If you're, a civilized person, you won't say it out loud, but you may immediately go to that place of like, well, she's bad, right? And that's not necessarily so. When you could step outside of the automatic reaction, right? Again, filtering all events through narrative, worldview, ideology, when you could step outside of that, you could see it as like neutral. She's reacting the way she's reacting. She may be upset. But you're not immediately reacting to her reaction. So again,
because one worldview could be, I've offended her.
Right.
She's pissed off at me now because I did something bad.
Right.
Another worldview could point you to, she's just having a bad day. It has nothing to do with me.
Right.
And there's plenty of worldviews to describe what's going on.
Right.
But for me, the power in separating myself from the matrix would be to be in a constant state of discovery. I wonder if I'm right to assume this, and go and check with her and ask her, hey, are you pissed off at what I said, or are you just having a hard day?
Right.
And connect with her and see what's going on. And knowing, even if she says, oh, it's just a shitty day, she may be making up an excuse, not hurt my feelings, to get a bigger tip.
Right.
And so
Absolutely.
then I get to check in, all right, is that even true? Which is the best way to like assess and go on with my day, basically.
Right. And then really, again, if you're beyond the matrix, you realize regardless of how you choose to interpret that, it's not truth.
Still the interpretation.
It's always interpretation. Even if you ask her and she responds, that's not necessarily true.
Or if everybody else says the same thing.
Absolutely.
The rest of the planet says, yeah, you were a dick. Still not true.
No, it's an assessment, and it may be well-grounded. They may have.
It may be worth looking into.
It may be worth looking into. If everyone on the planet says you're a jerk, you might want to look at that,
Still not truth.
But it's not truth, yeah. It may be beneficial feedback from which to intentionally choose how you interact with people. You're like, everyone thinks I'm a jerk. And it always seems to come from when I do this, right? So it's, again, unless you can step outside of that, the worldview, the narratives. And like I said, you're being fed information that builds your personal ideologies, your worldview, the narratives that you're not even necessarily choosing to adopt. Like, for instance, one of my favorite examples when I did trainings was the Madison Avenue, the advertising industry. Most people are completely unconscious and unaware of what's occurring with a commercial, right? So here's the psychology of it. You are lacking. I'm summing up every commercial. You are lacking. You are not enough. You need this product. When you have this product, you will be sufficient. You will be happy. You will be enough. You will be powerful. You will be successful, right? So that's the nature of all advertising. Is like, hey, just want to let you know you suck and you're not enough. But if you use this shampoo, all the chicks will dig you. And that's not being said overtly, right? They're not saying it in those words, but that's the imagery. That's the psychology behind the commercial. And now you've taken on the narrative, I'm not enough. I don't use Head and Shoulders. I'm not enough. I don't drive a Porsche. I'm not enough. And so this is part of the narrative you're building. That's part of the matrix. And again, it's not like this that the matrix is of our own building and design, because we do have the power to rewrite our narratives, to rewrite our worldviews. We do have that power within us. Now, we're not necessarily aware or conscious of that power, and we're very rarely stepping into authoring our lives. However, we do have that capacity. So if I'm unconscious and unaware of the narratives and worldviews driving my life, and I'm getting bombarded with messages like, you're not enough, and you need to be here to be happy, you need to be here to be successful, you need to be here to be loved, right? I mean, this is what advertising is saying. And again, it's not malevolent. What a great strategy, because you're going to want that thing. I mean, that's their job. Sell products. They want you to go to the store and buy it. So if they convince you, well, I'm going to be a better person if I go get it, that's good advertising.
Even
right?
on an emotional level, if they can get you to a place where you feel like you do want it.
Right.
So that next time you're at the store and you're like, Coke or Pepsi, you're like, feeling like a Coke. No rationale behind it, but I feel like I want that. That's years and decades of subconscious manipulation.
Right. Product
even to the point of like going to a baseball game, something like that.
Right.
And all your friends drink Coke. You're not going to be the one person drinking Pepsi.
Right.
And then you're going to identify even more so with those commercials over the years.
Right. Yeah, I've heard of people having product placement in their dreams.
Yeah.
like what the hell? Why am I in McDonald's? Like literally, like advertising is affecting you at such a deep level. You're seeing products, like there was a bottle of Pert in my dream. There was a Coca-Cola.
I don't know why, but I was really thirsty for a Coke the whole
time. Yeah. So it's product placement in your dream, because it does. It's I mean, again, that's the intention, to affect you at a psychological level where you now incorporate this information as part of the narrative and worldview that you live your life out of. You're not even aware of it. Now it's part of the narrative. I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I'm not enough.
And guess what happens?
And because every commercial's telling you you're not enough, you're like, well, shit, I need a Mercedes. I need Head and Shoulders. I need Coca-Cola. I need McDonald's. Like,
yeah, but it's not even that blunt or that obvious.
No, it's not obvious at all.
It's like, I'm going to go talk to this girl, and she turns me down. Yep, I knew it. I wasn't enough for that one.
Exactly.
Let me go talk to the next one.
Right.
And it's like it tilts you that 1% you need to go in that direction.
Because it's part of the narrative. It's part of your worldview. Again, remember, I said at the beginning, the worldview, the narratives, the ideologies, it's a filter. You see and interpret reality through it. So if in your narrative you are not enough, what you see, you collect information to support that belief. So all you see is I'm not enough, right? Because you've integrated it, you've incorporated it. It is part of your narrative, your personal story of who you are at an unconscious level. So you interpret all the information that comes through as I'm not enough, right? So it's reaffirming the belief. And like if you look at like the ideologies that are possessing the public, especially, I mean, now I'm seeing it worldwide, but there's many people are possessed by ideologies that they interpret the world through. They're not necessarily aware or conscious of these worldviews or these ideologies, but as information comes to them, the information can be completely contradictory to their belief, but they only see it as supporting their belief, right?
Dude, there was I was listening to one of Joe Rogan's new episodes today. Not even the whole thing, but part of it. And he was like, the whole thing with Black Lives Matters and police brutality and defund the police and defund all these other organizations, that he's like, we kind of need to keep us safe to deter people from just robbing and killing and whatever else.
Right.
He's like, we don't see every day a police officer and an uneventful stop with a respectful, like submissive or obedient type of person.
Right.
Like that doesn't make the news.
No.
Those videos aren't filmed. Those ones don't go viral.
Right.
He's like, all we're seeing are those ones in conflict, those big deal ones, which just so happen to be, look, another black guy is killed by another cop, viral. Everybody watches that. Right. Nobody watches the one guy that's like, hey, got you speeding, but having a good day, so here's a warning. No,
right.
That doesn't make the news.
No.
So what we're constantly seeing are things in that worldview.
Right.
Of,
but here's the thing.
Police are bad.
And again,
police are doing X,
but
Y,
here's
Z.
the thing. There's people who already live through the narrative that police are bad, right?
Or even they're not enough.
Or that minorities, blacks and others, are unfairly targeted, right? So you already have these beliefs, right?
And we're not talking about whether or not it's true. We're not talking about percentages or actual facts. We're just talking about the worldview.
I'm not here to do statistics. However, you already have that as a belief. Then, of course, any event you see confirms that. Yeah. Right? And it's so even if, and I don't really agree with this term, but it's a term used by law enforcement, a good shooting. I don't know if I agree with the concept of good shooting. Now, again, yes, of course, it is important to protect people and the public and yourself. However, it's even if, let's say, it's fully justified, you already have these layers of beliefs that you didn't necessarily consciously choose. However, it's everything you see, every event that occurs outside of you is evidence to support the belief. And because you're not even in a state of awareness and consciousness of getting outside of these worldviews, these interpretations, these narratives, the ideologies that drive your life, because you don't even have the practice of getting outside them and really analyzing them, taking a look at them, like seeing them for what they are. This is why I give events like this the meaning I give them. There's not necessarily that level of awareness. Like I said, 99.9% of the people are walking around 99.9% of the time in automatic. So it's not something that, unless you get into the practice of getting beyond the matrix, stepping outside of it, right? Seeing that for one, something we need to address here is your ideologies, your worldview, and the narratives that drive your life are not true.
I wish there was a way that we could sort of
interpretation.
Draw a line. I wish there was a way we could draw a line between the interpretations of people, different people. So like on you see a police shooting and say it's white cop shoots black guy, unarmed black guy, say. I know right off the bat there would be a lot of people up in arms saying, hey, Black Lives Matter and police need to be defunded, and this is just one more reason why X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And I know that there's a large group that would look at that and say, we need to support our police officers. And
absolutely,
this is more propaganda by the left or X, Y, and Z. They're going to have their whole interpretation of it.
Right.
And then
and neither one of them's true. Neither one of them's true. They're both interpreting through their ideologies.
Right.
So, but.
And you could switch it and say, black cop shoots white guy. And it's almost like all those narratives completely fizzle out because the parameters of the event don't trigger or resonate with any of the worldview.
Hold on. What about the worldview that the source of all evil in the world is white dudes? Then you're like, oh, well, that's a good shooting. he's a white dude. He needed to be executed, right? He's the source of all evil. So,
but I'm talking about the worldviews that were at play for the first initial example.
Right.
Like, you're not going to take black cop shoots unarmed white guy out onto the Black Lives Matter protests and stuff.
Right.
You're not going to bring up that version, that event.
Right. And
And
here,
the other side's not going to be like, oh, more propaganda. They're going to look at that and go, uh-oh, one of ours went down. They're going to take a totally different experience of it.
right.
So what I'm trying to do is find a way for people that are listening to this to understand where that line is. Because there's a very fine line between, like we'll say, the facts of the event and the interpretation, the narrative,
the meaning,
the worldview, the meaning that gets created in automatic or intentional response to an event.
Right. Yeah, and I would say it probably a majority of the time it's automatic because the worldview is already there. In fact, I would go so far as to say that when an event occurs that you have no there's not necessarily anything within your narrative or ideology or worldview that addresses it, then you're kind of in a state of like, whoa, what's going on here, right? Then you're actually in a state of thinking. You're actually in a state of curiosity because it's not something that you have a built-in automatic reaction to, right? And so you're like,
pink elephant fluffs the pillow of a panda's, whatever.
Right.
You're like,
yeah. Huh?
Okay, so first off, I didn't know they had pillows.
Right. It's funny because as I see myself here, and it reminds me of how spiritually evolved dogs are. That they look at everything with wonder, like it's new, right? Like this isn't some.
They're the true masters, and they're always fucking happy.
Yeah. And you don't usually make that noise. What's going on here, right? Right. So it is in a sense it is a curiosity. They don't have an automatic around what's going on, so they're just like.
They can develop it. Like you walk in and make a loud noise or something, they'll dude cracked me up the other day. I went to feed my dog and I'm working with him on like stay and leave it. So I put a bowl of food in front of him and I was like, stay, leave it. And I see no shit like a huge drop of saliva just pour from his mouth into the bowl, and I'm like, oh, hey, you can go ahead and eat. He went down and mounted down. I was like, I've never seen him drool or slobber or excessively lick anything. I'm like, he's literally triggered by the food in front of him to a physical response of excessive drooling. And it wasn't a drip, it was a pour.
like he had sprung a leak.
Yep. Like I've even walked into the room and been like, hey, no. And he's like, oh God, what happened? I didn't. And he's just maybe sitting there doing nothing.
Right.
I could walk in and say, hey, I didn't like that you did that. And he's like, huh? He's totally happy and wagging his tail and kicking up because he didn't recognize the noises I was making.
Right.
Like they absolutely take on that automatic, and they're always an automatic. They're just not always understanding of what's going on.
Right.
They've got no real worldviews.
They have no sense necessarily. And again, I'm speculating at this point. For all I know, they're really deep thinkers. I don't know.
Like squirrels.
Always in a hurry. I got somewhere to go. But it may be that they're just free of the meaning. That like how our worldviews of that in our narratives give meaning to events. And I'm not saying that they don't have a reaction to the event, right? Like you saying no, the meaning you could say is I'm in trouble, but they have no concept of I'm in trouble. They just go, uh-oh, like he ain't happy. And again, not that they have concept of you being happy or sad. They just it's acquired, instinctually acquired, that it's because of events, they have these pre-programmed responses, which is, again, really it is what occurs in humans. However, we have the power to get outside of it of our own will. Whereas, like, you look at, like the dog whisperer, right? There's work to getting the dog out of these automatic responses, right? And so, but a human
funny enough,
being,
it's almost always reward, not punishment and correction.
Right. Yeah. And again,
which I think is awesome, because if you look at how people learn, it's the same thing.
Right.
They don't learn by no. They learn by here's a reward for your good behavior.
Right. Yeah.
Whether it's self-imposed reward of, ooh, I feel good because they
Right.
complimented me.
Yeah.
Or it's
And
like, here's a promotion. Here's a
and
higher
it's
salary.
interesting because so this particular subject, let's look
Mhm.
at social media for a minute and the power it has to program
man.
you and possibly one of the strongest aspects of the matrix today. So social
Yeah.
media, right? They came up with this concept, and I'm not even sure there's a platform that doesn't incorporate this in some way, shape, or form. The thumbs up or the thumbs down or the happy face or the, you know what I mean? So it's what is it?
I
It's
don't know if you've seen this, but they have
feedback.
a caring feedback now.
Well, like what, the word caring?
No, like it's like an emoji. They have the thumbs up, the thumbs down, the hearty eyes, the laughing face, the sad face, and then a caring face,
What's the
which
caring
is
face look like? Oh,
smiling and hugging a heart.
oh, how sweet.
So like, oh, I care about that.
Right.
I don't like it. I don't love it. But I care about it.
I care. And oh God, that's so part of the narrative right now, right? There's these official narratives, right? And there's this ideology out there and a narrative that if you do A, wear a mask, you care. If you do B, don't wear a mask, you don't care. Right? That is
Why that's sometimes true. Some people that don't care don't wear masks. And some
Right.
people that care do wear masks.
right.
But it's not unanimous.
No.
By
And
any
it
means.
and again, it's a pre-programmed meaning. And because
Doesn't mean that.
you've already adopted a certain ideology, it always has the same meaning for you. Right? Unless it's someone that you hold in a different way. So again, if you already have a pre-programmed belief based on your ideology, based on your belief system, your worldviews, the narrative you've bought into, that person A is an evil fascist, right? And person B, well, he's an empathic, generous, great leader. Regardless of what person X does, I don't even remember if I'm using the right letters anymore. Did I start with
A.
X and go to A? Okay. So
A and B.
okay. So if person A does anything, you interpret everything they do is affirming the belief that, oh yep, he's a fascist, he's a racist.
Oh, that fascist donated to charity. What a dick.
Exactly. Oh, he's just trying to get one up on us, He's just trying to make it look like he's a good person. But regardless of the events that occur around that individual, because of your worldview that you've adopted and that's been fed to you through sources you trust, that you have no other way to react. You don't like sit back and think, well, is this possibly him being a good person? That's not. No, without stepping outside and getting beyond the matrix, that doesn't occur 99.9% of the time. And again, person B does something and it's like, oh, he's such a great person. He's such a good person, right? Because regardless of what this person does, right? He can make racist statements, but he's not the
Kill
racist.
somebody.
You believe the other person's the racist. So he can make completely racist statements, but you're like, oh, it's so adorable. Because your belief, the worldview, the narrative you have about this individual interprets everything as
Even
far as
to the
events
point
regarding
of-
that person.
Of like, even if there was footage of that person being raging, jerk, racist, offending somebody, like, that's got to be photoshopped.
Right.
That's got to be faked somehow.
It's a deep
Or whatever
fake.
justification might be going on.
Yes.
Like, well, that person must have done something that really deserved it. There's all
Exactly.
types of justification. But this
Yep.
isn't just for personalities we see online or on TV.
No.
This goes to like where you hold your friends and your family, your
And
mother,
family
your
members, yep.
kids. Like, I don't know how many times I've been in a relationship with someone where I could not get out of the box they held me.
No. And
I'd go out and I would do everything perfect. I did 150 things on this list of things I know you love. And they'd go to the one thing like, you forgot about the 151st. You're such an asshole. I can't believe you would. I'm like, that's what happens.
Right.
Stuck in that, not even just a specific ideology. It could be
Well, it's a
single
narrative.
belief.
It is a narrative. It is a narrative. They have a narrative about you as an individual. And they may have a narrative about men. So people construct these narratives around race, around sex, like there are men and women, right? There are men in the world who believe, oh yeah, can't trust a female, right? And there are women, you can't trust men. And what's funny is they usually end up marrying each other.
Yeah.
And then of course it's a disaster. However, that there is no getting out of that narrative because they're not even aware or conscious of it, right? And what's interesting is they'll put those narratives on hold in certain situations and scenarios. Like when you're fed up with the guy you've been with and you're now looking for a new guy, it's like the guy you've been with can do no right. And the guy you're looking for can do no wrong. And I mean, and men do the same thing with women, right? The woman you've been with for 15 years can do no right. You know, everything she does just irritates you, right? And a new woman in your life that you're attracted to, or that incites something exciting within you that makes you want to be with this person. Well, they can do no wrong. You know,
dude,
in fact,
perfect example.
They can do the exact same thing as the other woman. They could say the exact same thing in the same exact way, and you will interpret them completely different because you have a narrative around this woman and you have a narrative around this woman, and you interpret every event that involves woman A or woman B is filtered through the narrative regarding woman A and woman B.
Perfect example. And I know you're going to love this. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
I love that movie. I love that movie. Yeah. And it's funny because
they fall in love all over again because
right.
they forgot all the crap that led them to breaking up.
Right. It was erased.
They choose to do it anyway.
And yes, they even get the recordings of how much they irritated each other and how much they hated each other. But there was nothing. They were present to nothing. They had no more meaning. They had no more narratives about the other. So so even hearing where they had gone to as far as frustration and anger and, you know, all these feelings and really it's, again, you take
and the experiences.
Exactly.
And they're this and this and
exactly.
this. And I felt this way. And it was terrible.
But those experiences are constantly evolving the narrative.
And validating.
Exactly. Validating, evolving. It changes over time. Narratives aren't set in stone. And so that's why, like, at the beginning, it's all woo, sunshine and butterflies. But then as you move along, because the narrative is slowly changing about this person, that you get to the point where they can do no right. Nothing they say, nothing they do. In fact, it could be the exact same things they were saying and doing when you first met them. But because you've built up this narrative about this person. And that's why I used that movie in trainings with people, because I'm like, look, and again, I wouldn't bring out my interpretation of it until, you know, after they had seen it and
like the final weekend or something.
No. It would be, you know, I would assign it on one week and then, you know, review it the next week. However, typically people are like, okay, I don't get it. Because like, it's like an acid trip. Like they didn't see what I saw. You know, but
amnesia's good,
right? But as soon as I explain it from the perspective of how I interpreted the movie, they're like, "Oh, wow! Like that's profound. Like, yes, I see that now." But that's how I always interpreted the movie. It was funny. I got excited the other day. There was a podcast that I listened to, and the hosts of the podcast were bringing up movies they had been watching, and they both mentioned Sunshine, the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I'm like, But then their interpretation and their explanation of it, now maybe they just didn't go deep on it, on what it meant to them. But I was just like, they didn't see what I saw. You know, yeah. So like, to me, it's a profound movie because what it demonstrates for me is like, if you can step outside of and separate yourself from the narratives you create about individuals, about races, about sexes, about anything, right? All these things that you get triggered by, these are things that you can change your reaction to. And when you could step outside of it and go, oh, look at all this meaning I created in our relationship because of a narrative, a story I've been telling myself about this other person. And once I'm able to free myself of the story, get beyond the matrix, step outside of the matrix, we can be fully in love again. Well, I mean, it probably takes the other person being able to step outside of it as well, because if they're still
sometimes
because
Dude,
again, because you're newer. If you're able to step outside of it, right, and you're able to free yourself from it, well, now you're going to be coming from a place, from a level of intention that is different, right? And at some level, we do experience that. We do feel that, like, this is different. Right, we might not be able to put,
we might differently to it.
Right, we might not be able to put a finger on it, but it's like, okay, this is genuine, this is authentic, this is loving, this is caring. Whatever it is, there's something, because the person has transformed themselves through separating them, being able to separate themselves from the narrative, deconstruct the narrative, and get rid of it. Let it go. It's not true, but it's having you give meaning to and interpret the world in a way that's not working in let's say, in this particular relationship, right? Just like being able to step outside and separate yourself from a worldview, like let's say in your workplace, where if you have a belief about the work you're doing, the people you work with, if it,
the time you have to get up.
Right, exactly. And this narrative goes and goes and goes. You get to the point of, like, you hate your job. Right? You can't stand it. Now, when you first started working there, you were excited about it. This is work that you love doing. But because of a narrative you've created around the individuals you work with, around the work, the job itself, whether the time, the drive, especially if you're in Southern California, oh my God, sitting for 3 hours on the highway to get to somewhere, it transforms your experience. Your experience is always being filtered through that narrative, the worldview, right? Your ideologies. And so there is no step getting beyond the matrix without being able to step outside of the ideologies, the worldview, the belief systems themselves, those narratives, the stories you've told yourself about the people in your life, about events in your life, because that's where the meaning comes from. And that's the experience is triggered by the meaning that you've given any individual or event.
I was talking with a coaching client earlier today, and the way that I phrased it, I feel like was, because we were talking about worldview. The way that I phrased it, I think, was received by her in a powerful way, because it outlined for her and implied for her that there was a difference between her and her worldview. And to say, like, how do I put it? I said something along the lines of, you're not going to be able to go back and change the event itself. The fact, the measurable aspects of this happened at this time, whatever parties were involved, X, Y, and Z. But you can absolutely, and you're already doing that, changing your relationship to the event.
Right, by changing the meaning and the narrative you have about it. Yeah.
And she was even telling me, she's like, this was the worst thing that happened in my entire life, X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And she's like, but now, looking back on it, it was the best thing that ever happened in my life.
Right.
Because I'm more of the person I want to be today than I was back then.
Right.
And if that hadn't happened, I would have never gone down this journey. I would have never understood the things that I've learned. I would have never X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, the only difference is not in the fact of, this happened to so-and-so at this date and time, but it's the best thing or the worst thing. And that's a monumental difference. The event never changed, but the flavor, the feeling, or the dynamic of the experience is ultimately and always malleable. To change and say, I got shot in the face, worst day in my life, to I got shot in the face, best thing that could have ever happened to me. And now that's not what she was talking about, but as an extreme example, she never got shot in the face.
Okay.
But as an example, something that serious. You can't
Right.
change the fact that
You got shot in the
bullets hit
face.
face.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can change the entire experience of it.
Well, you could, well, yes, once you're able to change the narrative and the meaning that you give to it, because that's what
Well, it's
shifts the
always
experience.
possible. Anybody can do this at any time. It's whether or not they're aware of this ability. Like
Right.
knowing that you have
Yeah.
opposable thumbs. The knowing that, like, how many
They're
kids
so
know that
useful.
like, how many kids know they're constantly learning things that they can do? Like, hey, mom, watch this. I can run now. Like, okay,
Right.
I gotta watch you. Everybody can run. This is great. But it's such a big deal.
Right.
It's the same kind of thing. Like, hey, like I was with Maggie in LA. We went to that big spiritual center, Agape.
Mhm.
And there were some kids that came out. They were 16 years old or something, influencers, had tons of followers on Instagram and stuff.
Right.
And they got up there and they were ranting and raving. And this one kid, super charismatic, super passionate. I was like, I'm enrolled. I don't even know what he's talking about, but I'm enrolled. And he's coming out there saying, like, did you guys even know this? Like, it's the best kept secret on the planet. You can create your own experience. And this is how you do it. And he's just going on and preaching and telling all these people, like, it's the most brand new thing on the face of the planet. He's like, I'm telling all my friends. I'm like, guys, I'm choosing to be happy. I don't care what's going on. And he's absolutely infatuated with this concept.
Right.
And I look around in the theater and everybody's just like, this kid's pretty cute. How adorable. Like, I just
Right.
figured it out.
Right.
And I'm like, those types of dynamics, they are available.
Well, and it's
everybody
interesting.
All the time. It's whether or not they know and
Right.
choose to do it.
Right. And I think this ties into where we were at the beginning of the conversation, where we talked about these profound spiritual experiences that people have. And in all traditions, they all explain it differently because they all have their own worldview that they filter it through, like Satori, right? Or moksha, or
I'm gonna give mine.
what's the word that
Nirvana.
no,
that's,
what's the Western equivalent?
Christ conscious? No.
I was, well, maybe with some of the more esoteric, like maybe Gnostics or something. Well, anyway, in all traditions, there's this profound spiritual experience, but it's always framed differently, but it's always transformative. And so that kid, his excitement came out of the fact that this was transformative. This awareness, this consciousness is transformative. So when you get to that point of actually recognizing, like, oh my God, there is this aspect of me that I can separate myself from and look at and reconstruct, deconstruct, and shape it in a way that creates an experience for me that I'd be more accepting of, or more
empowered,
more empowered by, or empowered with, right? So once you have that awareness, yes, it's transformative. And like this kid, he's like, oh my God, it's amazing, right? And however, there are adults who have not had this experience.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this.
Gone their entire life without understanding.
Exactly. And I would say that, like, in the trainings that I've done, I've noticed that was one of the most profound experiences for people, was to be able to step outside themselves and see that they had this power to rewrite, right? To author their life in such a way, to author the narrative, to author the worldview in such a way that profoundly transformed their experience of reality, right? That's profound. That's a profound power. And that, in this conversation, we're calling getting beyond the matrix. That is a profound place to be. Now, again, you can't live there because it's not functional in interpersonal relationships, but it's absolutely a powerful place to step into, especially when you recognize that you
utilize.
Yeah, because especially when you're recognizing that you have reaction to something that you're not totally excited about, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to label experience here and say there are good experiences and bad experiences, and you should be experiencing this and you shouldn't be experiencing that. Because like one of those, at one point I was at that place, like, oh, well, I shouldn't be angry and I shouldn't be sad. And I want, exactly, I want to be happy and I want to be, you know. However, like now, when I decide to have a shit day and I'm like, oh, dude, I'm going to be in it. I'm going to be sad. You know, it's like so awesome, you know, because I come out of it like it in itself is transformative, in that I got to go through that day just feeling like crap. And because I got to feel like crap for that whole day, the next day, there's this profound distinction between what normal feels like now. It feels, there's a new experience of just having the everyday, you know, positive, whatever you want to call it, experience. It's so much richer because I chose in a moment to go into it and be sad or mad or whatever it was. And so now I'm not in a place of like judging and saying, well, you should always be happy and you should never be sad. No, be sad, be mad, and then come back, you know, and because it makes the experience of not being sad richer, or being happy rather than labeling an experience as a negative. Being happy becomes so much more profound when you let yourself experience sad. Being kind, right, to yourself is more profound when you recognize that you're not kind to yourself and you choose to be kind to yourself or to be kind to others, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you're consciously aware of choosing it, and you can be kind to someone that you've had a narrative around, like let's say no matter what this person says or does, you react negatively. Okay. And this is definitely typical.
People like that.
Right. And this is definitely typical with people you've had a relationship for a long time with, whether it be family members, even like old school friends.
Yeah, there's always the friend of the friend for me. I'm like, this asshole again.
Right.
No one invited him.
Right. Exactly. And you've already got a narrative around it. So it's actually to be able to, again, step outside of that. Let's get beyond the matrix. And in this moment, choose, like, he isn't necessarily a bad guy. You know,
I do is I go, is he still an asshole? Is he going to show up the same way, or is he going to be different today?
Right.
I'm still coming from that experience.
Right. But you could rewrite it that he never was, right?
But I'm hoping to rewrite it and be like, oh, he's awesome today. Maybe he'll be awesome the next day.
It could be something as simple as he's insecure, like, poor guy. You know, he's probably gone through a lot. And so you start to adjust your narrative. Again, neither one is true. Whether you have the narrative of he's an asshole, or, you know, he's probably gone through a lot of stuff and he's, you know, probably got a lot of pain and he's really insecure. And so he acts this way to try to affirm, you know, exactly. But it allows you to now be in a place of kindness with him. And now you can have a positive impact with this individual. And again, rewriting that narrative with anyone and everyone is totally doable and possible. But it's also something you have to be diligent with. Because unless you make it a regular practice of stepping outside of your worldview, of your narratives, the stories that you generate your life from, and unless you make it a regular practice, which is why in so many traditions, meditation is such a powerful tool, because it's being present to the world around you without the meaning, right? And again, I would say it's the same for, like, in Western traditions of like contemplative prayer, that these are practices that are designed to separate you from the worldviews and narratives that have you experiencing life the way you're experiencing. Not that the experiences are bad. Hey, man, you want to feel like crap all the time? There's nothing wrong with that. However, if you want to feel different, then look at the stories, the narratives, the worldview that you've constructed around events in your life, around people in your life. Because by reconstructing these
Or
worldviews.
even what normal is. Because something I've noticed a lot is like, oh, I'm just always, depressed, and I have a happy day here and there. So all of
Right.
a sudden, happy is not normal. When you
Right.
have a happy day, you're like, oh no, when is it going to go away?
Right.
You're like Eeyore every day. Whereas
Right.
that could be flipped. You could say, oh, just every day is always awesome. Every now and again, I have a bad day or shit day. I just give it to myself and have it the next day is great, like you were
Mhm.
saying.
Mhm.
But that's already having the presupposition that normal is on the side of happiness. Normal
Right.
is on the side of pleasure. Normal is on the side of, what I actually prefer and enjoy,
Right.
which not always for everybody. But
Right.
even that under like everyone's talking about, oh, coronavirus, no, it's the new normal. Like, well, no. New normal would have to stand up against old normal.
Right.
Like we're gonna have to reassess and reground into something to be able to call it normal.
Right. Yeah. It's not normal because it's nothing
And
like what
and
was.
both of those are a worldview.
Right.
What is the definition of normal?
Right. And I would equate that concept that you were just talking about as like it's like your default, right? It's like based on, right? If we look at the construct of your worldview, the narratives, the ideologies that drive your life, right? There's a large part of that has been set for years. And it's like a machine at this point.
Yeah.
It operates with
If you're lucky, you're like
precision.
16 right now.
Yeah,
You only got 16 years of it.
right. Yeah. And it operates with precision, right? It is a reliable machine, right? It's always acting the same way to the same stimulus over and over again, right? Well, that machine is is what has you in that default space, right? It's so if you're automatic, right? If your return point, your default is mopey or sad or angry or whatever it is, it's the machine. That machine that is basically
The Matrix.
it is the matrix. It is the worldview. It is the narratives, the ideologies that drive your life. And it's just ticking away, tick, 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 tick. And because you never look at it, you never even considered that you could take apart the machine and rebuild it. So because that's not even part of the awareness, the machine is just tick, 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 tick. And your default is, like you said, sadness, let's say, right? Or depression. Oh, yes. Huge part of the population, their default at this point is depression, right?
Or
They're
anxiety.
just, yeah, or anxiety, exactly. Depression and anxiety. It's like where you come back to. What causes that default? The machine. The machine. Oh, God, this is okay. So we're tying this in: the metaphors, the machines, the matrix. It's
I was gonna
perfect.
say we should like slap a definition on this now, so it's pretty clear. And
Right.
you started to a little bit, but I'm like, there is a definition for what we're terming the matrix, which I would assert to be the mechanics or the mechanisms that govern your life.
Okay.
Govern an individual's
Okay. So
experience.
now you're creating distinctions of distinctions. And actually, you're not. You're not creating distinctions. You're creating new words for distinctions we've already made. I'm going to go out on a limb on this because
Okay.
now in reality, I'm just as guilty because I've been using various phrases to really point to that one thing, right? So I'm
Right.
using I'm intentional in using those different phrases because there are slight distinctions. Like let's make the distinctions of worldview, ideology, and narrative. Okay, because I've been using these three terms over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And yes, I could have just said, use the term worldview for this entire conversation. However, I do want to make some distinctions here of what, because then now we're starting to analyze the machine. We're starting to break it apart. Okay, so if these are distinct, and so there's different parts to the machine, and we'll call one part of this machine your worldview. We'll call another part of this machine your narratives, plural, and we'll call it another part of this machine ideology. Okay.
Ideologies.
we'll call them ideologies, because in reality it's people
There's
are
a group of them.
adopting, yeah, and people adopt a multitude of them with no awareness of the idea of the nature of the ideology itself. I mean, it is rampant in our
Or any
culture and
background,
society. Yeah, no idea that there was actually people who sat down and thought this up and constructed it, and you just bought in, not even knowing it was ever constructed. You know, so
sounds like a good idea. Hashtag yeah.
exactly. So, okay, so the distinction of worldview, I'll lay that at the most fundamental level of your being, meaning that worldview is, and I'll put it in the basement. It is the aspect that is the hardest to recognize and the hardest to see, because it is fundamental to your existence, right? In that worldview is made up of, like, let's say your cultural heritage, right? So like the Irish man. There are certain aspects of an Irish man, right, that he's completely unaware of, but because he grew up in Ireland and because he's a man in Ireland, there are certain things he's taken on that he is completely unconscious of. And not only that, all the other Irish men and women are completely unaware of it, because it's fundamental. It's picked up at the most basic levels of our being and our interactions with others. So worldview constitutes, familial history, right? So
Language.
the language you use, and even the distinctions of the language of your, let's say the spoken language of your culture, as well as the language of your family and the people immediately around you. So there's that. And then there's the fundamental beliefs of your culture, which have never been examined necessarily by anyone in the culture. So like for instance, within Western culture, the concept, the belief that death is bad, right? That's fundamental in Western culture. Nobody ever considers it otherwise. Nobody ever looks at that and says, oh, well, let's take another look at death. What if it's great? Not necessarily. Like, yes, there are, again, at the level of worldview, and I would say here's where we start to transition from worldview into narratives, is like, or ideologies, which is like religion, depending on your religious beliefs. Now, some of that I can attribute down to those fundamental levels of worldview, because if you grow up in a culture that has been just embodying a religion for generations, it's not something that's ever examined or questioned or analyzed. It's just inherited, right? It's embodied through the way people are with each other, right? You've never even heard of the principle necessarily of the religion that's behind a way of being or acting with others. It's just because for generations, the belief in this religion, in this culture, has been embodied, this principle, like, let's say, hospitality, right? If your culture has been following a religion for generations where hospitality is just a thing, you are hospitable to everyone, anyone, right? And so that's just how it's not even necessarily taught to you as, oh, well, according to our religion, you must do this. Nah, it's just everyone does it. Everyone's like that. So it becomes a part of you. You'll question it because it's just inherited through the behaviors of those around you and your own. It just becomes a part of you. So that's where we'll put worldview. Now,
so that could be like expectations of the world.
Yes.
And presuppositions.
Not necessarily, because expectations suggest awareness and consciousness. I'm going to put worldview in the basement.
Not necessarily. If I jump off a rock, I'm going to expect to fall. It's not that I have to think about gravity and all the things happening.
Okay, so making the distinction of expectation here is subconscious expectation. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Conscious or subconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not like but it's not an expectation of, well, people should be hospitable. That's not the layer of worldview for this conversation, for the distinction I'm making. Again, I'm not saying that this is the definition of worldview, but for this conversation, this is what I am meaning by that distinction,
Gotcha.
worldview. Okay, so now what do I place at the level above worldview? I'm contemplating here because narratives are definitely. I'm gonna place ideology. I'm gonna put.
I would almost do worldview as the unconscious, unacknowledged presuppositions, unacknowledged expectations of the world, and then I would take a level on top of that, where it's either you've created your own aspects of worldview, beliefs, or you've adopted them.
No, I'm gonna
No?
take it a step further. I'm gonna make this distinction here that narratives and ideologies can sink to the level of worldview. So at one point, okay, so we'll say it's kind of like a trickle down effect for all the Reagan fans out there. It's the trickle down. So I'll say the next level above worldview, in contemplating this. I mean, it's arbitrary at this point. I'm going to say ideology, okay, because there are some, like in culture, in society, in families, there are acknowledged distinctions, principles, beliefs, and things that come from outside of you, right? So this is where I'm going to put ideology. Yes, this is a good way of layering it, and here's why. Because ideology, we're going to leave it at the level of there is an awareness, there's a consciousness because people talk about it, and there's agreed upon meaning given to certain events, right? And so this becomes ideology, that groups of people will agree to give a certain meaning to certain events. Okay, so this is
historical or current.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay. There could definitely, because I mean, you could, like, again, religion, right? So you're a Christian, and you may not, growing up, you weren't necessarily aware of the 10 Commandments, but when we step outside of like behaviorism and what I've inherited as just in being in the world and in being in my culture and society, that now there's distinctions being made. There's directives. There's meaning. These events have this meaning. These things are good. These things are bad. So at some level, there's an awareness. There's a consciousness. Okay, there's, oh shit, God's got 10 commandments. Okay, didn't know about this. And now it's like, okay, here's an ideal. This is an aspect of an ideology, right? And again, it's comes from, and again, the distinction I'm making here is that the ideology originates outside of you. Okay, so it's not personal. Now, you may shape ideology. And what I'll say is, so again, the trickle-down effect is your narratives. We're almost there. We'll get to narratives in a minute. But your narratives can, just like they can sink down into your worldview, well, they can also affect your ideology, right? So the ideology itself may be, like, we'll say it's something that was created outside of you. However, when it's internalized, you have play, and you can kind of shift meanings to things around. Now, at what point does it become narrative and no longer part of the ideology? There's probably a fine line there. And I would say at the point where you can find no one to agree with your interpretation of the idea, when nobody agrees that's the nature of the ideology. Because, like, let's look at Christianity, for example. Dude, there's like 10,000 ways that people on this planet currently look at Christianity and interpret it. Okay, which is right, which is wrong. I'm not necessarily going to get into a conversation about right or wrong around this, but there are 10,000 different ways that people look at it. And there's probably more, because when you consider that each individual is creating a narrative, but you could probably get 10,000 groups of people to agree, like, yep, we agree to these truths, these things, these principles, whatever, right?
Dude, I actually know a ton of Christians that are like, I prefer this church because that guy's interpretation of the Bible fits better with mine.
Exactly.
Like, oh.
Exactly.
So we're
yeah. So it's not so an idea. So in that sense, like, we can say that Christianity is an ideology, right? Mm-hmm. However, we can get 10,000 different groups of people to that have a different version of the ideology. Okay, we'll call it that. Or it's a version of the ideology. So at some level, your narratives and your influences can shift ideologies. Okay? I would say it becomes a personal narrative when nobody agrees. and again, that's just
and that's really the nature of it, right? It'll disseminate down further until there are individual aspects of it that aren't shared by the overall.
Right. And I'm not necessarily saying that narratives cannot be agreed upon. I'm just saying a narrative doesn't have necessarily a set structure. They're more personal stories about the world. Okay, so for instance, you may have a narrative. Again, this goes to the advertising, right? The advertiser is speaking to you and is having an impact on you. The impact the advertiser has on you is not necessarily the impact it has on another individual, especially depending on your level of awareness and consciousness to the psychology of the advertisement. So the narrative that you can construct about yourself, let's say from mass media, from advertising, from social media. Oh, you never let me finish the thing on social media. You got me all confused and mixed up with the new emoji. So in advertising, in mass media, in social media, you have things that you interpret on a personal level. So like the advertiser saying, if you ain't got a Mercedes-Benz, you're not enough. Again, they're not saying that in those words, but that's the psychology behind it. Like, hey, really awesome people drive Mercedes. Not really awesome. Like again, you don't consciously say that to yourself, but that narrative now may live within you now, right? That
or at least the seed of it.
Exactly. And where you go with it, but let's face it, people have been bombarded, especially our generation. I get that, with the newer generations, the nature of advertising and the nature of media has been transforming dramatically over the last decade or two. So it definitely operates differently, but now it's probably 100 times more effective than it ever was because of how much they know about the people they're targeting.
I was gonna say it's amazingly personalized,
right?
For people,
right,
based off of age, race, likes, education,
right,
expectations, website activity, what they've bought. It's ridiculous. There's some 500 some whatever data points they have on most people.
Right. And here's where, and this is good because this kind of ties in to where I was going to bring up social media. So in social media, the first aspect I wanted to bring up was the confirmation, the affirmation, the thumbs up, the heart, the smiley face. Like this is now feeding people. Like this, when I do these things and I say things like this, it's good. When I say these things and do things like this, it's bad. Right. So it's literally, we're molding each other. We're confining people because they want to be liked. This is one of the things that I found is prevalent in most human beings is they want to be right and they want to be liked, right?
You ever heard the term echo chamber?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm getting to. Hold on, we're not there yet. We're not there yet.
My bad.
Okay, so because it's perfect with social media. So they want to be liked, they want to be right. So this system, which social media is reinforcing, is that reward system, right? This is why it came up in the dog conversation. You get a heart, you get a thumbs up, right? You get really excited. So it's a constant feedback, right? There's feedback. I got views, I got likes, I got thumbs up, I got smiley face, I got kissy face.
I can only imagine what happens when a girl posts a selfie and every dude that's following her is like, hey gorgeous, I like your photo. And like, man, if I was ever having a bad day, I'd post a selfie. Hey, you look great, thanks. If I attach my self-worth to my external
exactly. And unfortunately that's what's happened now, especially with the youth. Their entire self-worth is wrapped up in social media. I mean, people have things occur within the environment, right, of the framework of social media, and they commit suicide. Like dislikes or something embarrassing that gets a lot of likes. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden your self-worth, you've attached your self-worth to these emojis, like literally.
Or a
Emojis.
cyberbullying post goes viral.
Exactly.
That kind of
Exactly. That is now, it's more effective and more powerful than advertising ever was, because you take it so personal. You know, a Mercedes commercial comes on, you're not really taking it that personal. So it doesn't really affect you. But, you know, someone comes on your social media and makes a statement and everyone's like, yeah. And then you feel like crap, you know, and again, because you've attached your self-worth to the emojis, to the thumbs up, the thumbs down, the smiley face, the happy face, the laughing face, right? So you've got your self-worth is wrapped up in there. Okay, so that's aspect one of the social media matrix, which is, I would say, probably one of the most influential and powerful aspects of the matrix today. It is because in my life up until this point, I've never seen a more powerful tool for enslaving minds than social media. And it's profound. It's beyond.
I wouldn't even call it enslaving. I would just call it complete manipulation.
It is, but no, I'm not saying enslaving like they've enslaved you. You are enslaving yourself through the weight, the value, what you like. So again, people want to be liked, right? I'm going to bring it back to people want to be liked, people want to be right. People are now projecting their image of themselves as their social media profiles, right? This isn't authentic people. This isn't real life. This is an image I construct and I sell everyone on, and everyone else is doing the same thing. And then we all thumbs up each other and happy face each other. Yeah. What are we happy facing? What are we thumbs upping? An image, an illusion, a
the
farce.
One person that actually does say, fuck all of this, I'm going to show up to be authentic. They become the new trendsetter that everybody else pretends to be.
No, I would say even 90% of the time, that's their new image. People, it is. People get caught up in, well, I'm going to be this type of person. Like, really, they live their life as if the labels and the graphics and the emojis and the shit that they put on these platforms is who they are. This is where we're at. That people are living their entire lives through this social media, projecting, this is my life. Isn't it great? No, it's not authentic. And the people around you aren't being authentic. This is image reaffirming image. I'll buy your bullshit if you buy mine. That's what's happening, right? That's selling an image. Chamber. And exactly. Well, we're getting to there because the echo chamber is even worse. It gets deeper, right? So I'm selling an image, and because I want you to buy my image, I'm buying your image. So again, you buy my bullshit, I'll buy your bullshit, and we'll all pretend like this is real. It's not. It is the furthest thing from real. It is the furthest thing from authentic. It is image. It is, I am selling an image. I am buying images. It is completely fictitious. It is completely an illusion. The very word, it is an image. It is, by the nature of the word, it is mythology.
Imaginary.
Well, yes, when you consider the people who are creative about it. Because I'm going to put imagination up there with there has to be a level of creativity. I've met people who have, again, this is definitely my opinion and my judgment, my assessment. This is not true of anyone. But I've met people.
Worldview.
Exactly. This
Brandon's
is
Matrix.
This is my narrative. This is a narrative I have. That I've met people whose image of themselves and their portrayal of this image is like watching the worst B movie I've ever seen. Like, oh my God, you play your character so bad. Because and again, this is my assessment. This is completely my opinion, but they bought into an image of themselves and they're constantly selling it not only on social media, in real life. They're like, it's like they're acting a role that they've constructed that has like zero authenticity, zero realism, and they're not even good actors. Like, they're bad at it. Like, oh my God, you're horrible at this role. Pick another role. Pick another role that you're better at, so that, again, my opinion, my assessment, no truth to that whatsoever. Narrative there, okay? And but it's something that I've noticed in the world of the mythology. And again, not that anyone's immune from a mythology of themselves. We all create an image of ourselves. And since before computers, we present an image of ourselves to other people. However, in real life, when you're actually face to face with people and having real conversations, not text messages, that's another thing I've noticed with this younger generation. They want to text everything. You know why? Because you get to pre-plan. You get to construct you're curating your image through your response, right? It's like, oh, no, backspace, oh, no, backspace, right? You're like, there is no, it's not genuine, it's not authentic, it's not spontaneous. Whereas when you're in real life, IRL, with someone, there is spontaneity, there is authenticity that you can see through the image. And that's why people have latched onto social media, because it's difficult to see through the image. So people would now prefer virtual life, because that's what it is. It is complete mythology. Are you putting a picture of every second of your day up there? Right? No, you're curating. You're picking and choosing moments of your life and perpetuating mythology of who you are and what your life is. That's the nature of social media. Now, let's get into the echo chamber. Echo chamber is even worse, because in the echo chamber, these platforms are so advanced at this stage. They have a level of artificial intelligence that gets to know you at a deeper and deeper level by what things you stick thumbs up on, what things you stick thumbs down on, the things you search on Google, the websites you click on. They've even got technology that watches where your eyes rest on a screen. They know, oh, you're focusing on that. You know what I mean? So now that, again, this artificial intelligence is accumulating. And what it does is, it doesn't like, oh, well, clearly, the AI isn't like, well, what's in the best interest of this person? No, the AI is like, how do we keep this person glued in, right? Because that's the nature of the technology. We want your eyeballs. We want your eyeballs on our platform all the time. So the AI is designed to, oh, you like that? Oh, how about this? Oh, how about this? Oh, how about this? Right? And so it's feeding you. And based, again, thumbs up, thumbs down, happy face, sad face, whatever. It's constantly recalculating to the point where all you're seeing and all you're interacting with is things that are reinforcing the matrix within you. It's reinforcement of the ideologies, of the worldview, of the narratives you hold. I mean, to the level of personal narratives, because it is seeing everything you do and making a calculated determination of, well, what do we feed you next, right? And so because of this, like, you're only ever getting opinions that you already hold. How is that going to make you grow? It's just reinforcing the ideology. It's to the point where, and again, this is why I felt like this conversation was so important in today's world, is that, now it's at the point where it's like almost at the level of insanity that people have bought into their ideologies in the world. There's like a craziness because it just keeps getting reinforced. It keeps getting reinforced. There is no diversity of opinion. There is no other side of the conversation.
Well, there is to an extent.
There is no debate.
Because I've found that even some specific posts, I'm getting kind of far away from my mic. I even noticed that at a certain point, there were posts that I would make wildly popular. Everybody would be like, "Yeah, we love that, Gingy, great job. You're so blah, 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 blah." Like, awesome. I'm gonna do more of those.
Right.
Then I'd put up anything that's at all controversial. Like, say, if it said either way on any vaccine conversation, or either way on anything political, or either way on anything really to do with like conflicting ideologies, where
Right.
there's not necessarily consensus yet.
Right.
And then I'd post any one of those, and it would almost always generate a fight, regardless of what I believed about it. It could be like, vaccine fraud, and I could post that. No one would even read it. It would take
Right.
the headline and say, "Oh, you're just one of those anti-vaxxers." I'm like, "Did you read it?"
No,
It's saying
but you see,
fraud about the
you
other
don't
way
get it.
around.
That is the echo chamber. Because look at the response. The Facebook knew, oh, this dude loves fucking talking shit on vaccine shit. So they feed it to him. Like, hey, check this out. This guy thinks they're fake or thinks they're fraudulent or whatever, right? And they know that guy loves vaccine conversations, right?
It's a hot topic.
Yeah, he loves
gonna share something like that.
exactly, and he's gonna go because you know how they know? Because the dude left 24 comments in the last vaccine post. You see what I'm saying? So it is the echo chamber. He doesn't necessarily share your belief, but because everyone like him who posts
I
20
posted it, and he's the person that's like that gets fed to him because he's the one that's doing it.
Exactly. And because there's 100 other people just like him who want to post things about it, and they'll do 24 comments in that post, they all get it. And then they just go back and forth. And they're just, again, all they're doing is feeding their own belief, feeding their own
like
ideology.
Three
it's
topics. Every time I posted, there'd be like the same two people headbutting.
Exactly.
I post another post, 8 weeks later.
Right.
Same two people. Hey, yeah. And they start headbutting about same issue, different issue.
Right.
It's like all of a sudden, there was a line drawn in the sand and I was in the middle of it.
Right.
And I never responded to anything. I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. Share. That's cool. Share. And I'm like, why are people arguing? What did I post?
and again, so that's why for me, the what will I call this? Because I don't want to necessarily give it a negative connotation, but the most effective aspect of the matrix today is social media. It is by and far the most powerful tool for dividing your consciousness, right? So we started off with reality and consciousness, right? It's blocking, beyond dividing. It is a block. And it's just, think about it like this. If the reinforcement of your worldview, ideology, or narratives makes it harder to penetrate, right? The more you reinforce it, let's say, the denser it gets, right? So these new medias are so profoundly powerful in densifying, is that a word? In creating this density of your worldview, narratives, and ideology, that it becomes that much more of a task for seeing it and penetrating it to get beyond the matrix. To get outside of the matrix, you've really
got to unplug literally from social media to get around
right.
that.
Yeah,
I have, and it's as if being like, it's not that I deleted my Facebook, but I haven't been on there reading posts in maybe 6 months.
Right.
Max, maybe more like 3 or 4 months.
Right.
But I've noticed that since then, I've started developing the belief, the worldview that I'm the only one that's thinking for myself. I look around at other people and I'm like,
weird, I've been having the same kind of experience.
Let's have a great conversation. And I engage with somebody and I'm like, wait, that's the exact like studies and information.
And
and
it's not even that.
They're
It's an
all
ideology.
other people are saying.
Exactly. It's an
But
ideology.
not even the ideology, because that may be slightly tweaked, their interpretation of the
Okay, we'll say
and
it's
their
a
recreation of it.
okay. So we didn't really flesh out narratives, but we'll say it's a shared narrative, right? Because there are narratives. There are like narratives in the media, right? That clearly certain media companies have certain agendas, and they have a narrative, and anything outside of that narrative doesn't make it. Unless they can twist it, spin it, or turn it in a way that it fits the narrative, no airtime is dedicated to it. So we've gone through worldview. We've gone
Even
through
the evidence. There's like a specific curated amount of evidence that gets shared as well.
Yeah, no.
If I talk to people with certain ideologies, they're all pointing to the same.
No, let's not get into that, because then I'm going to have to then we're going to have to get in the conversation what constitutes a fact. And there is so much bullshit flying around that is completely baseless. And but that's science. No, that's not science. Do you know what science is? Do you know how science works? Do you know the scientific method?
We did that in the last podcast.
Exactly. So we're not going to get into that. However, so we've gone through worldview, we've gone through ideology. Let's look at narratives, because like I said, these are personal. Well, I guess I did talk a little on this, but from the standpoint of, like we talked earlier about, the stories you create around an individual, the stories that you create around a particular type of an event, right? So these are things that are actually more malleable. You're more likely to have an awareness of and change your narratives. Okay. Like people may have a realization like, oh man, I thought you were this, or I thought you were saying this, or I thought you meant this, right? So there was already a narrative in place, but when confronted with something contradictory, there's a willingness and an ability to shift the narrative, right?
Or really, it hasn't been validated, cemented.
Exactly. It hasn't been fed back to the point where it drops into ideology and worldview, where now it's like cemented.
Very light in its density.
Exactly.
Being
Exactly. But if it keeps getting reinforced, again, the density goes up, the trickle down. I love all these metaphors I've created around these distinctions. Yes. So it either gets more dense, and so more difficult to deconstruct and to even recognize or to be aware of.
I've even heard it described as like layers of an onion. Like it gets solidified and it becomes something that you can build on top of. And in order to then unearth that narrative or that worldview underneath, you need to sort of take everything else off that you've built on top, using it as foundation in order to even get to it and challenge it. And then when you can't put everything back the way that it was, it almost unearths your entire experience of world in your life altogether. Well, up until that point, really.
Right. And you can look at that as from the standpoint of, like, let's say, back to the advertising, right? So an advertiser's telling you you're not enough, right? And you've bought in, like, because, you know, the advertiser says if you don't have a Mercedes, you're not enough, right? And the advertiser says if you don't wear these clothes, you're not enough. If you don't shop at these stores, you're not enough, right? So you've already got that layer of I'm not enough. And then something else comes along. It's not necessarily the same belief that I'm not enough, but it's like I'm not smart, or I'm stupid.
Girls don't like me.
Exactly. But it's built on that foundation of I'm not enough, right? And then girls don't like me, or whatever. And so you start to layer all these things. Now at the foundation is I'm not enough. Without I'm not enough, none of these things could have been stacked on top of it, right? And so yes, really, if you can't deconstruct your narratives, your ideologies, and your worldview to being able to see, okay, this has led to this, has led to this, has led to this. Because if you're not looking at it as all the layers that need to be peeled off, you can lose something, right? You can, not be aware, not be conscious. And that's, again, through practices, like meditation, where you can really sit and still the mind for periods throughout the day, or, a couple times a week, whatever you can do. Just the practice of separating your consciousness from those layers of interpretation, the matrix itself, right? So being able to just being without these layers of interpretation, right? The matrix itself, being without the matrix, beyond the matrix. By taking moments to sit and be in that space without those layers of interpretation will allow you to see those layers. It'll allow you to recognize, especially if in your meditation you're intentional in questioning. Like, let's say you had an experience that you're not entirely thrilled about. Well, then you look at, what meaning did I give this event? Why did I give this event that meaning? Right. And so by sitting in meditation, right. And so sitting in meditation around these questions and separating yourself from those layers of the matrix and being able to dissect and pull apart and deconstruct and then reconstruct, author. You have the power to author worldview, to author
what's interesting
your ideology, to author the narratives.
This is something that's being pushed for a lot in, I don't know, mainstream culture, I'll call it. Just as a phrase that I have not heard people use before. Where they're talking about deconstructing systems, racism, biases, all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to see it actually be adopted in a main way. The practice of deconstructing, say, a bias, or why do I think this bias is bad?
Right.
Why do I think, where did this bias come from? Did I adopt it? Did I create it? Instead of just going through like, oh, that's my bias, I need to go adopt their bias instead.
Right. And
which
that's
is
what
generally
you have.
The conversation.
Well, that's because what we're witnessing is polarization, right? So people are polarized by an ideology, by narratives, right? And it's because of, again, it's because of those underlying layers of worldview and ideologies and narratives that you have about yourself, right? So, there's a narrative that people who care about other people, they're Democrats, right? I mean, is that true? No, that's absolutely not true. They wouldn't be burning down cities if that was necessarily
partially true.
It may be, exactly. It may be for certain individuals, but there's a narrative that I'm buying into, right? And same with like a Republican narrative of like, well, Democrats are communists. Well, is that true? Are all Democrats communists? But it's a narrative. So you polarize. You're like, well, I'm not a communist. I believe in freedom. So you polarize to an already existing narrative and an already existing ideology. You don't even question it. You're just like, well, I'm not like them, so I'm over here, right? So that's part of it, is that it's shifts in one direction or another. Like, either it's polarizing with what you identify with what you relate to. So you're like, yeah, that's me over there. Or it's polarizing with the other side and go, yeah, this is me over here. But there's no questioning. There's no dissecting like, well, wait a minute. Like,
do I agree with all of this?
Exactly. If you start, because what you're talking about is a practice of like really critical thinking, right? Like actually seeing it like, okay, there's a narrative here. There's an ideology here. I'm going to look at all that this is. I'm going to look at this narrative. Because at that point, you now become a free thinker. You're not bound by an ideology you've adopted that's just, I mean, think about it. This model has successfully written people's reactions to the world. It's the furthest thing from choosing. It's the furthest thing from choice. I've polarized with a set of automatic assumptions, a set of automatic reactions, a set of a way of thinking, a way of interpreting that I had no choice. I did not create it. There was no co-creative process. This was something authored outside of me that I've just adopted. And because of this, like, again, and this goes to the layers of worldview, to the layers of ideology, that well, I am not competent enough to think for myself. Again, this isn't necessarily a conscious thought people have, but by having that in your worldview, that I need authority. I need someone to tell me. That's what I'll buy, right? That's what I'll believe. That's what I'll participate in, is because it came from on high, right? And what blows my mind the most is that the people on high are politicians, actors. Like, are you serious? What, Kim Kardashian says so? Like, really? These are the people on high? They say it, so you buy it? Like, I mean, I don't know. Again, this is my worldview, but it's pretty well established that
really
these are
on high.
No,
they're cogs in the wheel as well. Where did they get those ideas? They sure shit didn't make them up.
Okay, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you put them on high, so you adopt their ideology. I'm not saying they're on high. Definitely not. Politicians are some of the most incompetent people on the planet, in my opinion. That's my assessment. In no way true, but that's my assessment.
Influencers now, less than like Kardashians and stuff. More of the cool channel you find on Instagram.
I'm an old man. I don't watch shit on Instagram. Okay, so yes, I'm sure that's true. That like now it's Instagram and whatever else. Twitter, I guess people are getting their ideologies and their beliefs, and it's like, oh well, this guy on Twitter, I never heard of this guy. Well, evidently 10 billion people have, and they all follow him, and like they all listen to everything he says. And so again, they put these individuals up on high. And so whatever their opinion is, oh, that's my opinion, right? And because they've already projected on this person. And it's funny because it's to see that it permeates Hollywood at such a deep level, that because these are people that the average individual places on a pedestal, right? People in Hollywood, actors, actresses, things like that. They hold them up like, oh, they're amazing people. Like, how, like, really? You're getting your political opinion from an actor, from a basketball player. Like, look, basketball's great. I love to watch basketball, but because you make $1 billion a year playing basketball does not mean your political opinion is worth shit. Like, in reality, you're a basketball player. So, pardon me if I question the political opinions of people who have nothing to do with politics. And again, I wouldn't even trust a politician's political view on something, because they've definitely got something that they're an agenda, right, based on their opinion. So, and this is the thing, we just unquestionably adopt all these ways of seeing things, all these ways of thinking of things from these people on high, right? They're not, again, there's no truth to them being any more an authority on anything than anyone else on this planet. In fact,
and I would say it's not even on high all the time.
No.
If you hear a friend say something and you agree with it, you adopt it. If you hear a family member say something,
not true. I will say you do hold that friend on high, because there are certain friends that'll say something that, regardless of what they say, you won't adopt it.
Right. I guess you do have to have a certain level of respect for them.
Exactly. So, and that's the authority. So that's what I'm saying, right? You're not authoring for yourself. You see, there's an authority. So the authoring of your worldview, of the narratives you live your life by, they're being written by someone else. And it's because of where you hold these people that you even accept their way of looking at things, their ideas, and you don't question.
Or even try.
You just adopt an entire way of thinking, an entire way of interpreting the world, an entire way of reacting. I mean, think about it.
Really, we've been doing that since we were born.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I remember being in my 20s or something like that, and even still today, I'm constantly challenging the shit that I've adopted from my parents. I'm like, oh shit, that sounds exactly like what my dad would say.
Right.
Do I really want to keep doing that? And I'm thinking, okay, where did that act come from? Where did that thought process come from? I got to go then and acknowledge the presuppositions, the worldviews, the things that led to that response. This is not something like we were saying just gets done in a day. No. Something that gets like instilled in watching one YouTube video. This is something where we're cherry picking either from mom and dad or who they've talked well about or a teacher or a series of teachers or friends, peer pressure, or just sheer bombardment of information and
Right.
repetition over and over and over to just be like, I mean, yeah, Coca-Cola's pretty good. Put it in my put it in my rum, and
Right.
I'll have that drink every time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you've never heard of a Pepsi and rum and Pepsi? It's always a rum and Coke.
Well, if you've been a bartender, you've heard of it.
You have, but those people have already got their predisposition.
Yeah. They're just weirdos. Pepsi. I'm not.
So let's
I'm not going to get into rum and cokes.
Give me the 3 levels that you just did, just to sum
Okay.
up everything we just went through.
Okay. So at the bottom, at the foundation, in the basement, we're going to call that worldview. And I summarize that as that's all inherited. There's not necessarily any conscious awareness of any of the things you adopt as worldview. It's part of your culture. It's part of your family. It's part of your heritage, so to speak. You just, by the way people are being around you and by the way your society and culture functions, it gets written. Okay, so that's where the worldview gets authored, right? Is that it's such
That's
a
the
fundamental
foundation
level
of it.
that there's not really any awareness or consciousness or any distinctions made of it, right? Like, for instance, in our culture, there's a certain distance you could be from a person and not make them feel anxiety or nervous or whatever, right? We call it our personal space, right? This is something that we don't necessarily have to make distinctions of and go, okay, well, this far is personal space or this far. It's just something written into us, right? So it's at that worldview level that there's not even necessarily a conscious thought about, well, yeah, my personal space is about 18 inches. So if you could just back up about 1.5 inches. No, it's not like that at all. It's completely, for the most part, like, we do have the concept of personal space, but it's not something we consciously said it's this distance, and you know what I mean. Then there's the second level of the matrix, we'll call it, is the ideological, right? So at the level of ideology, there are, let's just call, they're ideologies, whether they're religions, whether they're philosophies, whether they're more bidded pieces of thinking or ways of thinking. They're in a group. They're a group. They're identified and accepted by individuals, right? So like a religion, right? There are people who adopt particular religions, and so that is an ideology. And like I said, you can take Christianity, and there's 10,000 groups of people who look at it in 10,000 different ways. But so each, you could call them all the ideology of Christianity, but in reality, each is distinct in that they have a different way of interpreting or giving meaning to the world or whatever. Okay,
so the ideology is specific to the group.
Yes or no, because you could say, well, you could be like, let's say you live in a 100% Christian nation. You're like, well, I'm a Muslim, so it's not necessarily the group around you. You just choose, this philosophy or that philosophy. So I either look at the world this way or look at the world that way, but it's like, I didn't create it. Okay. It's not a story I generated. It's something that I've adopted that exists, right, in the world as a concept, as it's an ideology. I mean, I'm trying to give it another word, but it's ideology. So again, ideologies are philosophical, they are religious, they're cultural, they're society, government. Government and types of government are ideologies. Political beliefs, political systems are ideologies, right? So you
found these truths to be self-evident.
That's based on an ideological come from a concept, right? Then you have on the very top, which are at first the most malleable, but the more they get reinforced, they solidify and become part of that core in the worldview. And those are your narratives. Narratives are the stories, the personal stories you tell yourself about. It's the meaning you give to otherwise neutral events, and all events are neutral. Okay, so for instance, somebody gives you feedback, and you're automatic, because of the narrative you have that advertisers fed to you. I'm not enough. So when somebody gives you feedback, you translate it as criticism, right? So that's it, the narrative, the story about you. So it's not necessarily something you're aware or conscious of, but it's something that you've constructed personally. A story you have about other people, stories you have about yourself, stories you have about even systems of government. So there's, like, for instance, there's the ideology of the Democratic Party and there's the ideology of the Republican Party, but your narratives, you have narratives about each party, right? So there's people who have a narrative that, oh, Republicans are fascist and, oh, Democrats are communists. Okay, so that is an example of a narrative I have created around a political ideology. It's not necessarily true. It's just a story I run. And all of those layers, from worldview up through narratives, that is the matrix through which reality, consciousness is filtered. And that's why you react to the world in the way that you react. And that's being stuck, being enslaved, bonded in the matrix is not being able to distinguish your consciousness, not being able to separate it from those layers of interpretation, right? So without an acknowledgement, without a recognition, without being able to separate yourself from the worldview, the ideologies, and the narratives, there's no awareness and consciousness. There's no power to react, feel, the meaning you give, the interpretations you have. It's all automatic. You're just functioning like a machine. And that's really how those aspects of you, that worldview, that those narratives, those ideologies, they start to operate like a machine. Tick, 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 and it's just automatic, right? An event occurs, bam, reaction. Event occurs, bam, reaction. Event occurs, bam, reaction. That's in the matrix, right? You're stuck.
Let me ask you this. The matrix, I'm looking at the difference between a newborn experiences reality versus, say even a 10-year-old or someone that, I can think back to times when I was 10 years old and I'll remember those moments for the rest of my life. Like
right.
Skiing. I remember skiing when I was 10 years old on my 10th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
But being 10 days old, no memory.
Right.
I'm sure there is, but I can't think what I was doing on the 10th day of my life.
Right.
And I wonder, and this is the question to you, if the matrix of all those layers that you just went through,
mm-hmm.
if that's necessary for really navigating the world, for interpreting the world, to being effective in the world, to remembering experience.
Okay, so I'm going to separate it from remembering for a moment, and I'll get to memory in a second. Is it necessary? No. Is it useful and effective? Yes. And that's why authoring it becomes so powerful, because for one, like I said at the beginning, you couldn't operate in society if you completely eliminated all worldview, all narratives, all ideologies. You'd be oceanic. You wouldn't even communicate. You'd
be
just
like a newborn.
Exactly.
You're just soaking in experience.
Exactly. You'd be pure consciousness. Right now, you may still have a physical body and wander around and whatever, but people are like, whoa, kind of steering you around because you're oceanic.
He doesn't have a narrative about the streets and jaywalking.
Exactly. He has no narratives, no worldviews, so the street doesn't have meaning, right? Crosswalks don't have meaning. Cars don't have meaning, right? So yes, they are useful in that you can navigate the world through the matrix. So. But is it necessary? No, you could wander around oceanic and, you probably won't last very long if you don't have people around you kind of watching out for you, but it is, I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure it's even been done. Like you look at these dudes who sit in meditation for 30 years in a cave, like, where are you at that point? And so I again, I'm sure it's been done. Not something I would I wouldn't necessarily recommend. However, the power is in those moments, and that's why I think it's so many philosophical traditions and religious traditions, it's the moments of this experience that are so powerful, like the satori, right? Is that boom, you have that moment where you completely are outside of your belief systems, you know, the worldview, the narratives, the ideologies, they're all like, you see them for what they are. You're like, oh shit, this is why I am the way I am. This is why I do the things I do. This is why I act the way I act. So you're able to separate yourself from them and see them, right? So now this goes into memory. Okay, so I'm gonna segue here because
I would say, just to
slightly different
attach on to the end of that it just even understanding the difference, instead of even separating, but even noticing the distinctions between all aspects of the matrix. So where something's going on, you can choose to interpret it through the matrix or see it for what it is.
Right.
Be with the experience of it, and when it's over, then go filter and see what it was all about.
Right. Like, so for example, I was actually on a phone call the other day, and you know, kind of, you know, sometimes I hover around that consciousness of like complete separation, but you know, I'm having a conversation, so I'm not completely, but you know, the nature of the conversation and where we were going with it, there was a moment where I was separated, you know, and again, these, like, I had no necessarily had because now it's got kind of stuck with me, but I had no necessarily a distinct memory of, you know, like you have defining events, like you remember your 10th birthday, but could you recall every single day, every single minute, every single hour of your 10th year on this planet?
No, not even every minute or hour of my 10th birthday.
Okay, exactly.
I don't remember where I woke up.
Now here's the thing.
What we did.
Now here's the thing. You could recall it. You may have no memory of it now, but you could recall it. And it's like, I've noticed in that, going into that beyond the matrix state, you have access to everything, every experience you've ever had. All of a sudden, in this conversation I'm having with this person on the phone, I'm recalling like every aspect of, like, from when I was, God, how old was I when we moved out of there? I was like about 10 years old. So I'm taking like literally my entire environment and all the events occurring around me at like 10, 11 years old. I'm like, I remember every single neighbor on my street. I mean, literally all their names. If you'd have asked me 10 minutes before that, like, name all the people on the street you lived on when you were 11, you know, I'd be like, Tammy, Shan, like I could name like maybe 3 or 4 people. I did the whole street. I'm like, oh my God. Like, and then like, as I'm talking to this person, I'm like, I'm bringing up all this stuff that wasn't present as part of my memory, but I had complete recall of this part of my life. Like, I remember everything about school at that age. I remembered every friend I had, all their names, like what they looked like. Like, I'm like, dude, I mean, these aren't things I've thought about. Like, you know, I'm not necessarily give it away here how old I am, but I'm pretty old. And this is a long time ago. And to have complete recall of this part of my life in this moment, I was just like blown away by it. Like, and even the person on the phone's like, wow, you remember all that? I'm like, I didn't, like 10 minutes ago, I couldn't have told you any of this, but it was like, whoosh, I kind of slipped into that state where it's like, you have access to everything you've ever experienced. Now, in comparison or in contrast to your experience of like, yeah, I remember my 10th birthday, but again, you remember the 10th birthday because it was eventful. It is written into worldview and narratives that are present with you now. So it's relevant, right? So it's on recall. You could call up your 10th birthday because it's like, it's in some way, your worldview, the narratives you live your life by are rooted in something that occurred that day, right? And so we do have these events throughout our lives. And for some people, it starts much earlier. And for some people,
they are important to memory, to recall, not to recall, but to...
I wouldn't say having any memory is necessarily important. You know, again, it's like that oceanic, like when you're in that oceanic state, you have no memory.
Like, to remember something like you were just talking about,
right?
The memory
can help you deconstruct.
Relative,
right? Well,
it needs to be relative to an ideology or a narrative or something that's relevant today. Is what you just said, right?
Okay. If that's what I said, let me reword it. It doesn't
Okay.
need to be relevant, but it is in some way rooted in narrative. So I'm not saying there's a complete
So it's not
narrative.
necessary, but it
It's
seems to be
like if
rooted.
you completely forgot your 10th birthday, you're not necessarily free of whatever narrative it was feeding into.
Right. Or if the narrative was gone, would I still remember my 10th birthday? More than likely.
Yeah, it depends. Well, again, it depends on the layers of significance because it may be more than one thing. I mean,
I guess even all
let's
those
acknowledge
memories
that.
are collected and maintained and utilized in the same operations of narratives and worldviews and stuff. Because they
I wouldn't
all
say
contribute to the worldview.
right, but here's the thing. I don't want to make it out like that's like as if it's funny because we've been using the analogy and the metaphors of the machine. It is
Not separate.
it isn't that necessarily that it's separate, but it is not causal. Okay.
Right.
So it is related, like you said, there's a relationship most likely to a worldview, to a narrative, to maybe even to an ideology, but it's relevant in the sense that it contributes to the filters, the matrix itself, right? Which is that worldview, ideologies, and narrative. It is in some way, shape, or form a part of it, but not a necessity necessarily, not a cause of necessarily. Like
Or
again,
a symptom of.
exactly, because like let's say on that day, again, I'm just making an example. I'm not. I don't want to
I went skiing
insinuate
hot
that
chocolate.
that this is necessarily what the 10th birthday means for you. Let's say on your 10th birthday, you had an experience of someone saying something to you that hurt you deeply and made you think less of yourself. Okay. So now remember, you've been programmed through advertisements for your entire life that you're not enough. Okay. So, however, not having a Mercedes isn't as significant as that event on your 10th birthday for you. Again, not to say that that's causal and that's the only reason that you have that narrative of not being enough. There are so many aspects to it, and some of them you may have absolutely no memory of. Remember, it was the feedback loop. It reinforces the belief, but doesn't necessarily stick around, right? The birthday is stuck around, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's causal to any aspect of the matrix itself. So
my interpretation was that they were, like you said, in relationship, that they were
right,
relevant to each other. My experience on the 10th birthday is relative to a worldview or something else that I have. Not necessarily that they have to,
right,
but that I'm noticing correlations that they are.
right.
And I'm like, interesting. Now I can see how the experience on my 10th birthday
right
was at a higher level of emotional impact or a higher level of being remembered or significance, really, because of the worldviews and narratives that are relevant to me now. Like, just to give you some clarity on this, like being raised as a kid, my parents didn't give me meat, dairy, eggs, even white processed sugar until when I was 10 years old. My mom let me have a cup of hot chocolate on my birthday skiing, and she said, "You can have sugar once every decade," right? And so I'm like, wow, my first time having sugar. And I drank it down, and it stuck with me.
At 10. Yeah, so it's like you were on cocaine the whole day.
But that ties into a narrative that I've had. Like, it's been a big part of my experience growing up, being the kid that didn't have any like meat, dairy, sugar, or whatever else.
Right.
Or the kid that was different, or the kid that had packed lunches. And then getting into my 20s and being like, thank God for that. I contribute my health to like my parents being so diligent with food and all these other things. To then going on and being like, well, I actually didn't do such an awesome job. I actually am finding a better way to eat and contribute to my health
Right.
nowadays, but it was better than like, McDonald's every day or
Right.
something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So, like,
Absolutely.
my entire worldview around health and food and diet and all of that stuff is absolutely relative
Hmm.
to, or relevant to, that one experience when I was a kid.
Right.
So I'm like, it's not that if I didn't have any worldview around food and health, that I wouldn't remember that birthday, because it
Right.
was like being hopped up on cocaine,
Right. I can
skiing all over the mountain all
imagine
day.
a 10-year-old who's never had sugar drinking
Yeah,
some hot chocolate, which is
a
like
whole
double
cup of
whammy
hot
because it's
chocolate.
also chocolate. It's
Yeah,
chocolate and sugar.
caffeine and sugar. But I can see how they contribute to each other, which was the
Right.
point. So I'm
Yes.
like, they're not really separate. The
Right.
worldview, the narratives that I have, and the memories I have from them. Because I couldn't tell you where I woke up, what ski resort we went to, what we ate for food. All I remember is
Hot
we went
chocolate.
skiing and hot chocolate.
Yeah.
And my mom's face and what she said to me. Like, that moment really burned into my mind
Right.
because it's been referenced over and over and over throughout the years of my young adulthood and into,
Right. Which, okay. So
adult.
again, there's another layer there to significance because it was a memorable event for mom. So she's mentioned it, which it's feedback, right? It's that feedback loop. Mom mentions it. And then a couple years later, sister mentions it. And then a couple years later, you mention it. And then, so it's constantly feeding back. So
Hmm.
it's polarized, right? The more that event is projected
Ingrained,
at the
stitched.
consciousness, it becomes polarized, right? So definitely the more you talk about a past event, it's funny because there may be events of your life that are talked about by people in your family that you have no memory of, but it's like it's all of a sudden it's like it's a defining feature because
Uh,
you've been told the story. Everyone else remembers it but you. And it was like, did
and
you
now
remember
I've
that
kind
time?
of have memories of it. Like,
Right.
I've got memories, like, people are bringing up, oh, remember that one time when you were one? And I'm like, nope. And then the next year and the next year and the next year and the next year. Now I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Right.
Just like I was there.
Right. You've heard the story enough now that, oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a memory. So again, not to minimalize those events that kind of do get burned in, because I just don't want to. What I don't want to create is a correlation of it being causal necessarily, because like I said, there may be layers to an event, and there may be more reasons than one that it's been polarized, like we just mentioned, of it being repeated over and over and over again within family or whatever
Mhm.
else. It's just like, well, you can't get away from it. It's like we talk about it every Christmas. So yeah, that may be a something, and like you said, you've now associated it with health and and your choices of eating and health and well-being and everything else. I wouldn't necessarily say it's causal or even a contribution to your worldview or narratives around how you eat. You know what I mean?
But
It's
it
like
would be like
it's definitely
evidence for
significant.
me. It can
It
be
could
evidence
be,
that
and it
can
may be
validate.
something. And if well, let's not get into validating because nobody needs validation of their worldview. Okay,
Alright.
it's
Fair enough,
it's
fair enough.
it's happening. That's why it's worldview. It's why it's a narrative. It's like but constantly being validated by your filters, right? But let's look at it from the standpoint of like, if you do have something like that, a polarizing event, if you're in the space of like, I am deconstructing my worldview, I am getting outside. I want to free myself from the matrix. I want to get beyond the matrix. I want to author my being and my reaction to the world. I want to shift this space around. So taking those polarizing events may support you in dissecting your worldview and your narratives that drive you and the ideologies that drive you, because you can say like, okay, why is this such a polarizing event? And so it's the same. It's getting outside of yourself. This in the same methods that we talked about earlier with like meditation, contemplative prayer. Like there are many ways of approaching like that, separating consciousness from the matrix, those layers, the worldview, the ideologies, and the narratives, by separating. and then taking something like a polarizing event and looking at it with new eyes. Because if you could separate yourself from the matrix, from the worldview, from the narratives, then you can see something from a new space, completely different. So now it no longer has the meaning that you've been giving it. So like you can even see that part of you wants to contribute like, oh, well, this event is created this worldview over here. Dude, that event, you already have worldviews about the event. There's layers to this construction you've created. This construct of the matrix is so deeply layered. It's that onion. Like you see it as like, oh, it's the core. No, it's like layer 8, And so, that event itself, if you could get outside of your worldviews of the event, outside of the meaning you gave the event and the stories you've made up about the event, well, now you can look at this event in a completely different way.
Tell me what you mean by that, getting outside your worldview. Right.
Okay, so for one, like you gave that event meaning, right? You said, well, it was because I never had sugar and it was my mom and the look on her face. Like you even gave the look on her face meaning. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, so there are so many layers of meaning that you've given this event. When you can identify like, oh, that's shit I'm making up, like boom, that's a belief, that's an interpretation, that's an interpretation. Like if getting outside of the worldview, getting outside the matrix is seeing it with no meaning, seeing it with no belief about it, seeing it with no story about it. It's just seeing it for what it is.
What about seeing the difference between the event and the beliefs about it, the interpretations of it? Is that the same?
Yes, because you're
okay.
That's what I'm saying. You're seeing the event without any of that. So yes, you've separated it. You've separated the meaning. You've separated the all of that, the stories you've told yourself about it. And like I said, you could do it in pieces. Like you could like take the look on mom's face and the hot chocolate and the skiing and you know what I mean? You could start to really deconstruct every aspect of that and pull out all the meaning and everything. And when you can look upon it without all the meaning you gave it, there may be something else for you there. There may be a deeper level of meaning that you author. None of the meaning you've given that event is true. But if the meaning that you are able to decipher from this, you feel isn't serving you in a positive way, you can reconstruct the meaning of this event. And now it has a different impact on you. Like I said, let's say the 10th birthday was a very negative experience where you made up negative things about yourself and things about other people. And you know what I mean? Like now when you're deconstructing and you realize, well, like that's not necessarily so. That's not necessarily so. Let's pull off all the meaning I gave to the event, because the event is completely neutral. And all I did was interpret, right? So all the streaming, let's go back to our matrix slide. All the streaming, yes, all the streaming, that's just the information, right? It's just information. But you gave every single character and every single line meaning, right? And so when you're able to separate the raw data, right, the event free of any story about it, any meaning, then you're able to reconstruct meaning around it.
For me, that was the big thing that I was thinking with being free of the matrix, is not necessarily operating without worldview or operating without the narratives, but simply knowing the difference so that you can experience the events for what they are,
right,
and experience the worldview, the narratives, because all of that stuff is changeable.
Right.
Because I don't really think we can completely disconnect and see things without worldview. I mean,
you can, and you can have moments of it. And like I said, it's probably even possible for someone to walk around in that oceanic like consciousness all the time. I wouldn't recommend it. You don't want to be there all the time because it becomes very difficult to have any kind of interpersonal relationship, because if you were truly in that space, you couldn't converse. You would have, there's no language. right?
Yep.
There's no interpretation. It's purely experiential without
Yep.
any meaning, right? And that's why I compare it to the newborn, because that's the newborn. It's just, it's oceanic. It's like there's no meaning. They're not distinct from the world around them. They're just like in this experience, and it has no meaning, and there's no judgment, right? There's no filter. It's just taking it all in, and so it's a profound feeling to be in that space, and that's why it's been attributed and so talked about in so many traditions. And it's always like this, it's even a state that people aspire for, right? So like earlier you brought up nirvana. Why? Well, I didn't want to bring up nirvana because nirvana is like being in that state, right? Whereas satori is like a moment, which is realistically for, human beings being human in the world, a moment of that is probably a lot more beneficial and useful for you in a social environment. Now, if you've been sitting in a cave for 30 years, yeah, go nirvana, because what are you doing? You're just sitting in a cave. You're not interacting. Like,
what's the opposite of nirvana? It's not really the opposite, but it's a similar like state, but you, instead of going so far in, you reach nirvana, you go so far out, and it's a similar experience.
Well, it's interesting because nirvana actually means to blow out, right? So it's, I would say it is going out. It's.
And what's the going in version?
Are you talking about Buddhism in particular? I don't know if it within the.
I don't remember.
Okay,
At the Monroe Institute, somebody was like, "Oh man, you went so far out." But he's like, "I've gone so far in that I hit nirvana." He's like, "That's when you see like everything in the biggest, or you see everything in the smallest." It's like it's two ends of the same spectrum.
Microcosmic and macrocosmic. So right. Yeah, I've had an experience like that as well, where you're experiencing the microcosmic and macrocosmic all together as one. But I kind of like, is that like to make a distinction as well, my satori was better than yours, like I'm like, I don't know. I think you're just drawing distinctions from the experience that he's drawing distinctions from the experience that you weren't drawing from your experience. Like,
well, I would wonder if
experience is personal, and everyone will have their. Remember, as soon as you go to interpret the experience, it's all bullshit. It's interpretation. You're already applying worldview, beliefs, like you cannot convey experience to someone and for them to know the experience. You could talk about it. Words are symbols. They represent, and the best they can do is give you an idea, but it cannot convey the experience itself. So you're assuming because of the words that this guy used to show, he's talking about in and I felt out, and like, dude, these are words. Like his experience of in may be your experience of out. So like again, these are distinctions that I'm like, I ain't gonna give much credence to this because it's personal. It's personal, it's experiential. Yeah. People know when they've had this type of an experience. How they describe, I told you, when you come out of the experience, try describing it.
Ask him.
It becomes foolish. You're like, you can't describe it. You can't describe it so that somebody gets it. You know what I mean?
I was
like
actually
you
able to
best.
paint it once.
And that was great for you. But if I looked at the painting, I'd be like, what the, like it doesn't necessarily have any meaning to me. I'd be like, okay, yeah.
It was pretty awesome.
Gingy, well, you were smoking dope, it looks like. So it's not necessarily, it may be the perfect representation for you. That symbol somehow embodies the experience. But you're not conveying the experience with that painting. Now, here's the thing about art. You do convey experience. Well, I should say you impart experience, or gosh, this is a tough word. What do I want to say here? You provide a medium for people to draw experience from, right? So people have
the memory of the experience.
But no, not necessarily. You've expressed something, but what people get from it is not necessarily what you expressed.
I see what you mean.
You see what I'm saying? Like I may look at a painting and like, wow, like this is amazing. Like the experience I'm having in this painting or in this piece of poetry, it's profound. Like there's music that I'm drawn to that to me is profound and it's meaningful. But if like I play that same music to someone else, no, this is lame. Can we change it? You know what I mean? Like it's profound to me. It's meaningful. It's significant. But it's because it's because of the interpretation, the meaning through my matrix. God, I gotta stop hitting the microphone. My meaning that I give it through my matrix, right? So it's significant to me. So that's why when we had the conversation last week, when we brought up truth, and it's like, okay, well, truth is in that. So we'll say truth is reality, is consciousness, and then all those layers of interpretation, what we're calling worldview, narrative, and ideologies, those distort the truth. That's what they do. They filter. And because all you can do to convey through communication is use symbols like words, right? That all you can do is symbolically represent something, which does not ever convey the experience. And your experience is even distorted because there's layers between the reality, consciousness, and the experience itself, and that's the matrix. So even your experience, like you said, I went out, and he's like, well, next time try going in. You guys are probably talking about the same thing, but
well, no, he was drawing a line saying that there were two different states, and he said one is the micro, one is the macro.
Really,
so
I've had both.
Thought you knew the difference.
Yeah, no, well, I've had both. So
like,
simultaneously, again, it's experiential. For me, what I was experiencing in the moment was microcosmic and macrocosmic, right? So there was no distinction, and there wasn't like, oh, well, now I'm going to go over here, now I'm going to go there. No, it was one experience. Okay, so and again, I'm now interpreting at that moment. I was interpreting in this moment. I'm interpreting. I would say some of the most profound spiritual experiences for people is when that matrix is kind of vaporized. That's when you have the most profound experiences. But as soon as I come back to this world and try to explain it to you, it becomes meaningless. You're not, I don't care how eloquent my use of the English language is, I cannot convey that experience to you. So because again, language itself is merely symbols, and to even start to express it, I had to come back into the matrix. I can't express it out there. I can't even talk when I'm out there. You know what I mean? Talking becomes meaningless. So it's like, and then you come back, you're back in the matrix. Like, that's why it's so funny when people are on psychedelics, because they're having these profound experiences and then listen to them talk. They sound like a bunch of idiots, because they're trying to explain this profound experience that they're having, but you can't explain it. You cannot convey that experience in words.
Actually, the first time I tried to explain my first time eating mushrooms to somebody, I was like, man, it's amazing. It's like everything breathes. And they're like, okay, why is that cool?
Right.
I'm like, okay, touche. I guess I can see how that's not really important.
It doesn't sound that cool right now. At the time, it was super cool, right? Yeah.
My dog kept looking at me like, it's what dogs do. Like, what's the big deal?
No, but this was different, right? Everything's so profound, but again, it's in the experience. It is deeply profound.
And really, how much is worldview, presupposition, all that stuff present for people on psychedelics, DMT or ayahuasca or mushrooms or acid or whatever?
Even in Satori, like. And I'm using it as a general term and not necessarily as a, let's say, a practitioner of Chan or Buddhism or Zen or anything else. Satori as a concept, right? A moment of enlightenment. Now, if you're a Zen master and you've been practicing all your life to do the things that you feel are going to get you there, when it occurs, you're like, that was it. That was Satori. But when it occurs for other people, like I said, it depends on your worldview. See, the Zen master, he's already got a worldview, right? He's got Buddhism, and really, whether he realizes it or not, because he's in the practice of Zen or Chan, let's say it is that those ideologies are at work as well. Well, there's also elements of Taoism in there, and there's elements of Confucianism in there. So there's many, and really, if you look back behind Buddhism, there's elements of Hinduism. So it's there all those. There's mixed in all kinds of philosophies and ideologies, and it's giving you your interpreters. It's your matrix, right? So the Zen master's matrix ain't the same as the Christian guy growing up in Utah, right? He's going to say, oh my God, I think I'm God, right? Or Jesus, I'm Jesus. Like he's going to have a different experience because his worldview and how he interprets that experience is going to be different because of the layers, the matrix that's there. Like I said, when he was outside the matrix, there were no words. There was just this experience, right? But then he came back, right, into the matrix, and he tries to verbalize, and he's all, I'm Jesus Christ. And everyone's like, whoa, dude, like, you sure about that? Let's keep that on the DL, okay? Because, again, even the people around him have a certain way of interpreting. If somebody says, yeah, I'm Jesus Christ, like okay, Again, in Hindu culture, I'm the Brahman, I'm Vishnu, I'm Shiva. They're like, okay, yeah, congratulations, you figured it out.
Duh.
Way to go. Yeah, like, this idiot, of course you are, but because of the worldview, there's already in place different motives, different worldview, a different way of looking at the world and interpreting the world with each of these individuals that we're talking about, that they take the same exact experience and they have a completely different story about it, because the story, you couldn't tell the story without your matrix being involved. It comes out of it. It's formed by it. It's fabricated by it. And that's why there's such profound power in rewriting, authoring, deconstructing, and reconstructing your matrix, because it gives you a whole new place to work from in communicating, in reacting to the world. That's why it's such a powerful and the hell? Did you turn audio on? Am I getting feedback on myself?
Just a little feedback for a second. I think we're good.
Okay. So it's in that, in that space of interpretation, the matrix is always there. If you're interpreting, you're in the matrix. To be out of the matrix, you have to free yourself from all those layers of interpretation. Because, by definition, in this conversation, that is the matrix. You couldn't articulate. You couldn't communicate. You couldn't symbolize an experience without it, right? And so that's why
I wonder what symbols they actually used in this matrix writing we've got on the screen. It's frozen for me right now, and I just started looking at it, and I'm like, wow,
yeah. And again, I'm pretty sure that's not even necessarily from the movie itself. That's
someone made up some.
Yeah, that's like
Japanese characters.
It's like the Matrix. But it might be. I wasn't really looking that closely at the symbols.
Totally made up.
All I saw was blonde, brunette. So. Alrighty. Yeah. Oh damn. Okay. Yeah, we went long on this one. Yeah. Alrighty. So, summation. What do you got? Let me hear you wrap it all together. I feel like I've given my summation. I've given my interpretations. Yes, I'm tapped. I've given it all. I've given it all I got. What do you got?
Let's see. To sum it up, I think there's lots of layers to the matrix. I don't think an individual can really exist, let alone thrive, without it. It's almost like, in my experience, a necessity for like egoic consciousness, which is what majority of people.
Wait. A what consciousness? I'm not familiar with the term. Oh, egoic. Okay, I thought you said goic. What is that? This is a state of consciousness I never heard of. Ego, like I've heard of that. Yeah, I've heard of egoic.
Yeah. So really like what we were talking about in one of the last podcasts, where the sensory information that's coming into the brain is somewhere up in the millions or billions, and it's cut down to like 2,000 max.
Right.
And that is the spotlight, egoic, focused, conscious awareness. Right. And besides getting into like remote viewing or seeing ghosts and shit, or telekinesis or telepathy, like any extrasensory perception stuff, besides getting into that, we're even really getting into like alternative states of awareness with the brain. That is all of an individual's experience, minus those things.
Mhm.
So ego and egoic awareness and that 2000 bits of information is more or less all we know. That's to operate without, like, you don't need worldview to grow your hair or to beat your heart or to even breathe and think thoughts. That'll happen no
I don't
matter what.
know. I don't know. Worldview could affect the beating of your heart. I'd put money on it.
As far as I know, a specific worldview could have you manipulate it and even take control of it. Like, you could just choose to stop breathing right
Well,
now.
think about this. Let me again. I don't really want to get too deep because this is the wrap up. However,
This is
just
summation.
food for thought, Gingy.
Okay.
What if you remember we were talking about that default where you come back to? What if it's like a high level of stress, like everything stresses you out? When you're not stressed, that's rare occasion, right? And it's you're always stressed about everything, and you're always in a hurry, and you're always in a rush. Couldn't that affect your heartbeat?
Potentially.
And you're only stressed because of the worldview. What do you mean potentially? Like, isn't that hypertension?
Well, I'm not
isn't
saying
hypertension like?
I'm just saying it's not always that way. I'm sure that somewhere in the world someone exists.
I didn't say always.
Stressed.
I didn't say always. I just said
that's the way it is.
I'd put money on it that your worldview could affect your heartbeat. That's all I said. I said I'd put money on it that your worldview could affect your heartbeat.
Let me be more accurate here, because what I'm speaking to is you could affect your heartbeat, your thoughts, your breathing, but if you're completely ignored, it's going to go on happening anyway. You don't need worldview for it to happen. That's what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. The heart will beat even in the oceanic state, like the newborn. It's got a beating heart, and it has no worldview at that point. Depending on how many minutes old it is. All right.
So really, the matrix is not something that's necessary, but something that is immensely valuable and useful as far as operating at this level of consciousness.
Here's the thing.
Am I in a summation or what?
I gotta chime in. So it is useful if you're aware of it and you intentionally and consciously author it to be effective for you, right? Because it could be extremely detrimental. It could be extremely bad for your health. It could be extremely so. If what you mean by effective is like, like thriving, moving towards thriving in life, or moving towards success in life, or moving towards a sensation or sense of completion or completeness. So it
functioning in the world.
Right. Functioning.
Getting the food you need to get, having relationships.
Okay. So yes.
Engaging with the world, paying your taxes. It's necessary. And I'm not even going to say necessary. It's effective for things like that. It can be detrimental. It can be extraordinarily powerful and empowering. But it's I keep wanting to say necessary. It's damn near necessary to, because I'm looking at it, it's effective because if you cut out all that worldview and stuff, you are like a newborn oceanic and just sitting there taking it in. Someone's like, hey man, don't forget to pay your taxes. You're gonna be like, that's it. However, if you've got any level or layers of worldview presuppositions to the point where, like, maybe you are depressed all day, every day. Maybe you are contemplating taking your life, or you're paralyzed and staying inside. You're still able to function no matter how painful and ineffective you're functioning. It's functioning. It'll have you lasting longer than wandering aimlessly through the streets. Is what I'm saying. Or
well,
not
okay,
eating and forgetting to consume shit.
but here's the thing. Now we're assuming that somebody in that oceanic, free from worldviews, free from the matrix consciousness is wandering. What if they're just sitting? What if they're just laying there? Then I mean, they're in pretty good shape. There ain't nothing
So
bad gonna happen.
realistically, I have no real accurate way to expect what somebody in that state would do, what they would look like. I just know that it would be vastly different than the majority of all people that I've met operating. So I assume they would be sitting around, you know, like they're stoned out of their mind, or just falling asleep all the time, because they don't know the difference between a dream and waking consciousness. You know, that's it reminds me of that TED talk that I watched at the Monroe Institute, where this lady got a brain aneurysm or something like that in her left hemisphere of her head, and it went off. And you can I think go on YouTube and search for like left brain, right brain TED talk. I forget what the lady's name is, but she's basically describing how in her left brain logical thought process, this thing goes off and it shuts down the left hemisphere of her brain, and all of a sudden she's in like pure ecstasy, and she can't tell the difference between the atoms of her hands and her atoms of the walls and stuff, and it's just like immense oneness and euphoria and just this bliss that's overcome. And then her left brain kicks back on and she goes, oh my God, I'm having a stroke or something, a seizure. I don't know what's going on, but I need medical attention. I need to go call 911. And she runs over to the phone. As soon as she grabs the phone, left brain shuts back off and she can't tell the difference between atoms anymore. And she's blissing out and all this ecstasy again. And it was that back and forth. And she started to explain like the role of the left brain being completely fundamental and necessary for navigation, to know the difference between things, to draw distinctions like that, to have a linear thought process and go call a number and know what numbers are and all of that stuff. So I'm like, in that sense, I could imagine being completely euphoric and blissed out without having any left brain ego type of thought process going on. And at the same time, I'm like, if having that is necessary in my mind to really relate to people,
having an aneurysm,
having the left brain up and running and functioning and stuff, and engaging with people and all this. So let me finish this thought.
Okay, I don't want to get
where I'm going with this is that for me, the power in the matrix and getting beyond the matrix and all of that it lies within the ability to choose, the ability to put that left brain, the logical thought, the narratives and the worldviews and all that stuff, put it in the passenger seat to observe, and letting other consciousness experience the experience without it, and being able to tell a difference. Oh wow, that's my judgments, or oh wow, that's just pure stimulus. I know that's still borderline. I'm making up the story that this is pure stimulus and that this is,
and you're making up the story
presuppositions
that the brain is causal in the nature of consciousness. It has nothing to do with the brain. The brain is that, like, again, if reality is consciousness, right? The brain is an apparatus. Like, rather than looking at
it's like a receiver,
rather than looking at the failing in the brain as a function of what's causing a state of consciousness, look at the state of consciousness as causing what's occurring in the brain. You know, most likely consciousness is at the level of cause, and probably nothing else. Like if that's reality, if that's the nature, the foundation of reality is consciousness, well then it is causal. And the brain, it's just an apparatus. It's like your radio tuner. Oh wow, that's showing my age. There's no such thing as radio tuners anymore. So just like all the radio stations in the room, right? But you've got a tuner and you tune it in. The brain's just that. It's a tuner. It's
But
got
even
a, it's
that's
got,
to differentiate the difference between consciousness and the brain.
well, I'm saying that's how the consciousness can connect to the brain and convey information. And really, I don't want to say consciousness, let's say mind. Because I think I want to make a distinction here between mind and consciousness. And mind, which is ethereal, we'll say, it's non-physical, can feed into the brain through the same apparatus that a radio uses. But rather than looking at the brain as causal, because I find that I almost find that as a ridiculous concept at this point. Like, even though I know materialistic, mechanistic worldview, it's all brain chemicals, and that's what, no, I ain't buying that.
But what if the brain and something happening to it, or stimulus from outside the brain, shifts channels? Which is really all I'm really talking about. Left brain, right brain, is the experience of total unity and euphoria versus the experience of individuality and linear thought. I'm not saying that the brain is causing the experience. I'm saying that the brain is now, and really it's irrelevant to talk about the brain's function in this process.
Exactly.
Because the ultimate point that I'm trying to get to with this is that in mastering the understanding or maximizing effectiveness with Matrix and this whole conversation we've just had, is to know the difference and be able to choose or even intentionally author the worldviews, the presuppositions, the matrix itself, and being able to say, I'm going to pause that and just experience. And I don't even really think that's as necessary in the world today, to just experience, but to at least know the difference and choose what you experience in the world, what you feel about the world, how you define the world, how you engage with the world, instead of the automatic of really perpetuating the shit that's going on in the world.
Right.
And like, if you're a person that takes up any type of offense or like the world isn't the way it should be, then this would be a very powerful tool, because it's not the world that's going to change because of the opinions of a single individual or even a group of people.
Right.
It's going to be your relationship with the world that gets shifted, thus creating a new result in the world, which actually does change. Well, that's what Gandhi was talking about. Be the change you want to see in the world. If you go out and try to change the world so you'll be happy, never work.
No.
But if you're like, you know what, I'm going to be happy, love the way the world is anyway. Now there's one more happy person in the world, which is contagious, which is going to spread to other people and create more happiness. It's fundamentally the way the world works, the way reality works, the way this fucking matrix works.
Right. And like, that's why I said at the beginning of the conversation, I felt like by laying consciousness as reality at the foundation, I feel like where you can go in this conversation is where you've just arrived at, which is a profound power to author your experience in life. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I feel that it would be so profound and so significant for every individual to have an experience of that power, to author, to construct and deconstruct the things that will forward you and empower you versus the things that are, victimizing you and destabilizing you and depressing you and, things like that. I feel that it's a tremendous power to have, is that getting beyond the matrix. Alrighty.
And even the title, man, I feel like is a little misleading, because it's not like get beyond it. I'm like, understand the fuck it is.
Yes, but that's not as intriguing. Yeah. Everyone thinks they know what it is. So here we are. And really, I'm not here to tell you what it is. I give you I gave you my opinions and my assessments, and we philosophized about it. I am not ready to set out doctrine.
All of our worldviews and beliefs, narratives running in the show are subject to change.
And not necessarily the views held by anyone.
In fact, they're not held by anybody right now. We've already let go of them.
Okay. Alrighty. So great conversation, Gingy. Thank you.
Word up.
And thank you
Definitely.
for those who joined us. Pop. And we'll see you next time. Philosophy. Phenomenosophy. Thank you for tuning in to the podcast. Phenomenosophy. Later.
Word up.